Chapter 1. The Republican. He was born with a gift of laughter and a sense that the world was mad. And that was all his patrimony. His very paternity was obscure, although the village of Gaverlac had long since dispelled the cloud of mystery that hung about it. Those simple Brittany folk were not so simple as to be deceived by a pretended relationship which did not even possess the virtue of originality. When a nobleman, for no apparent reason, announces himself the godfather of an infant fetched no man knew whence, and thereafter cares for the lad's rearing and education, the most unsophisticated of country folk perfectly understand the situation. And so the good people of Gaverlac permitted themselves no illusions on the score of the real relationship between André-Louis Moreau, as the lad had been named, and Quentin de Kercadia, Lord of Gaverlac, who dwelt in the big grey house that dominated from its eminence the village clustering below. André-Louis had learnt his letters at the village school, lodged the while with old Rabaul, the attorney, who in the capacity of fiscal intendant, looked after the affairs of M. de Kercadia. Thereafter, at the age of 15, he had been packed off to Paris, to the Lycée of Louis le Grand, to study the law which he was now returned to practice in conjunction with Rabaul. All this at the charges of his godfather M. de Kercadia, who by placing him once more under the tutelage of Rabaul would seem thereby quite clearly to be making provision for his future. André-Louis, on his side, had made the most of his opportunities. You behold him at the age of 24 stuffed with learning enough to produce an intellectual indigestion in an ordinary mind. Out of his zestful study of man, from Thucydides to the encyclopedists, from Seneca to Rousseau, he had confirmed into an unassailable conviction his earliest conscious impressions of the general insanity of his own species. Nor can I discover that anything in his eventful life ever afterwards caused him to waver in that opinion. In body he was a slight wisp of a fellow, scarcely above middle height, with a lean, astute countenance, prominent of nose and cheekbones, and with lank, black hair that reached almost to his shoulders. His mouth was long, thin-lipped, and humorous. He was only just redeemed from ugliness by the splendor of a pair of ever-questing, luminous eyes, so dark as to be almost black. Of the whimsical quality of his mind and his rare gift of graceful expression, his writings, unfortunately but too scanty, and particularly his confessions, afford us very ample evidence. Of his gift of oratory he was hardly conscious yet, although he had already achieved a certain fame for it in the literary chamber of Rennes, one of those clubs by now ubiquitous in the land, in which the intellectual youth of France foregathered to study and discuss the new philosophies that were permeating social life. But the fame he had acquired there was hardly enviable. He was too impish, too caustic, too much disposed, so thought his colleagues, to ridicule their sublime theories for the regeneration of mankind. Himself he protested that he merely held them up to the mirror of truth, and that it was not his fault if when reflected there they looked ridiculous. All that he achieved by this was to exasperate, and his expulsion from a society grown mistrustful of him must already have followed but for his friend, Philippe de Vilmorin, a divinity student of Rennes who, himself, was one of the most popular members of the literary chamber. Coming to Gaverlac on a November morning, laden with news of the political storms which were then gathering over France, Philippe found in that sleepy Breton village matter to quicken his already lively indignation. A peasant of Gaverlac, named Maybe, had been shot dead that morning in the woods of Meupont, across the river, by a gamekeeper of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azyr. The unfortunate fellow had been caught in the act of taking a pheasant from a snare, and the gamekeeper had acted under explicit orders from his master. Infuriated by an act of tyranny so absolute and merciless, M. de Vilmorin proposed to lay the matter before M. de Kercadia. Maybe was a vassal of Gaverlac, and Vilmorin hoped to move the Lord of Gaverlac to demand at least some measure of reparation for the widow and the 3 orphans which that brutal deed had made. But because André-Louis was Philippe's dearest friend, indeed his almost brother, the young seminarist sought him out in the first instance. He found him at breakfast alone in the long, low-ceilinged, white-paneled dining room at Rabaul's, the only home that André-Louis had ever known, and after embracing him, deafened him with his denunciation of M. de la Tour d'Azyr. "I have heard of it already," said André-Louis. "You speak as if the thing had not surprised you," his friend reproached him. "Nothing beastly can surprise me when done by a beast. And La Tour d'Azyr is a beast, as all the world knows. The more fool maybe for stealing his pheasants. He should have stolen somebody else's. Is that all you have to say about it? What more is there to say? I've a practical mind, I hope. What more there is to say I propose to say to your godfather M. de Kercadia. I shall appeal to him for justice." "Against M. de la Tour d'Azyr?" André-Louis raised his eyebrows. "Why not? My dear ingenuous Philippe, Dog doesn't eat dog. You are unjust to your godfather. He is a humane man. Oh, as humane as you please. But this isn't a question of humanity. It's a question of game laws. De Vilmorin tossed his long arms to heaven in disgust. He was a tall, slender young gentleman, a year or two younger than André-Louis. He was very soberly dressed in black, as became a seminarist, with white bands at wrists and throat and silver buckles to his shoes. His neatly clubbed brown hair was innocent of powder. "You talk like a lawyer," he exploded. "Naturally. But don't waste anger on me on that account. Tell me what you want me to do. I want you to come to M. de Circadia with me, and to use your influence to obtain justice. I suppose I am asking too much. My dear Philippe, I exist to serve you. I warn you that it is a futile quest, but give me leave to finish my breakfast and I am at your orders." De Vilmorin dropped into a winged armchair by the well-swept hearth, on which a piled-up fire of pine logs was burning cheerily. And whilst he waited now he gave his friend the latest news of the events in Rennes. Young, ardent, enthusiastic, and inspired by utopian ideals, he passionately denounced the rebellious attitude of the privileged. André-Louis, already fully aware of the trend of feeling in the ranks of an order in whose deliberations he took part as the representative of a nobleman, was not at all surprised by what he heard. De Vilmorin found it exasperating that his friend should apparently decline to share his own indignation. "Don't you see what it means?" he cried. "The nobles, by disobeying the king, are striking at the very foundations of the throne. Don't they perceive that their very existence depends upon it, that if the throne falls over, it is they who stand nearest to it who will be crushed? Don't they see that? Evidently not. They are just governing classes, and I never heard of governing classes that had eyes for anything but their own profit. That is our grievance. That is what we are going to change. You are going to abolish governing classes? An interesting experiment. I believe it was the original plan of creation, and it might have succeeded but for Cain. What we are going to do," said M. de Vilmorin, curbing his exasperation, "is to transfer the government to other hands. And you think that will make a difference? I know it will. I take it that being now in minor orders, you already possess the confidence of the Almighty. He will have confided to you his intention of changing the pattern of mankind." De Vilmorin's fine ascetic face grew overcast. "You are profane, André," he reproved his friend. "I assure you that I am quite serious. To do what you imply would require nothing short of divine intervention. You must change man, not systems. Can you and our vaporing friends of the Literary Chamber of Rennes, or any other learned society of France, devise a system of government that has never yet been tried? Surely not. And can they say of any system tried that it proved other than a failure in the end? My dear Philippe, the future is to be read with certainty only in the past. Abacto ad posse valet consecutio. Man never changes. He is always greedy, always acquisitive, always vile. I am speaking of man in the bulk. Do you pretend that it is impossible to ameliorate the lot of the people?" De Vilmorin challenged him. "When you say the people you mean, of course, the populace. Will you abolish it? That is the only way to ameliorate its lot, for as long as it remains populous its lot will be damnation. You argue, of course, for the side that employs you. That is natural, I suppose." De Vilmorin spoke between sorrow and indignation. "On the contrary, I seek to argue with absolute detachment. Let us test these ideas of yours. To what form of government do you aspire? A republic, it is to be inferred from what you have said. Well, you have it already. France in reality is a republic today." Philippe stared at him. "You are being paradoxical, I think. What of the king?" "The king? All the world knows there has been no king in France since Louis XIV. There is an obese gentleman at Versailles who wears the crown, but the very news you bring shows for how little he really counts. It is the nobles and clergy who sit in the high places, with the people of France harnessed under their feet, who are the real rulers. That is why I say that France is a republic. She is a republic built on the best pattern, the Roman pattern. Then as now there were great patrician families in luxury, preserving for themselves power and wealth, and what else is accounted worth possessing. And there was the populace crushed and groaning, sweating, bleeding, starving, and perishing in the Roman kennels. That was a republic, the mightiest we have seen." Philippe strove with his impatience. "At least you will admit, you have, in fact, admitted it, that we could not be worse governed than we are? That is not the point. The point is, should we be better governed if we replace the present ruling class by another? Without some guarantee of that I should be the last to lift a finger to effect a change. And what guarantees can you give? What is the class that aims at government? I will tell you. The bourgeoisie. What? That startles you, eh? Truth is so often disconcerting. You hadn't thought of it? Well, think of it now. Look well into this Nantes manifesto. Who are the authors of it? I can tell you who it was constrained the municipality of Nantes to send it to the king. Some 10,000 workmen, shipwrights, weavers, laborers, and artisans of every kind. Stimulated to it, driven to it by their employers, the wealthy traders and shipowners of that city, André-Louis replied. I have a habit of observing things at close quarters, which is why our colleagues of the literary chamber dislike me so cordially in debate. Where I delve they but skim. Behind those laborers and artisans of Nantes, counseling them, urging on these poor, stupid, ignorant toilers to shed their blood in pursuit of the will o' the wisp of freedom, are the sailmakers, the spinners, the shipowners, and the slave traders. The slave traders. The men who live and grow rich by a traffic in human flesh and blood in the colonies, are conducting at home a campaign in the sacred name of liberty. Don't you see that the whole movement is a movement of hucksters and traders and peddling vassals swollen by wealth into envy of the power that lies in birth alone? The money changers in Paris who hold the bonds in the national debt, seeing the parlous financial condition of the state, tremble at the thought that it may lie in the power of a single man to cancel the debt by bankruptcy. To secure themselves they are burrowing underground to overthrow a state and build upon its ruins a new one in which they shall be the masters. And to accomplish this they inflame the people. Already in Dauphiny we have seen blood run like water, the blood of the populace, always the blood of the populace. Now in Brittany we may see the like. And if in the end the new ideas prevail? If the seigneurial rule is overthrown, what then? You will have exchanged an aristocracy for a plutocracy. Is that worthwhile? Do you think that under money changers and slave traders and men who have waxed rich in other ways by the ignoble arts of buying and selling, the lot of the people will be any better than under their priests and nobles? Has it ever occurred to you, Philippe, what it is that makes the rule of the nobles so intolerable? Acquisitiveness. Acquisitiveness is the curse of mankind. And shall you expect less acquisitiveness in men who have built themselves up by acquisitiveness? Oh, I am ready to admit that the present government is execrable, unjust, tyrannical, what you will, but I beg you to look ahead, and to see that the government for which it is aimed at exchanging it may be infinitely worse. Philippe sat thoughtful a moment. Then he returned to the attack. You do not speak of the abuses, the horrible, intolerable abuses of power under which we labor at present. Where there is power there will always be the abuse of it. Not if the tenure of power is dependent upon its equitable administration. The tenure of power is power. We cannot dictate to those who hold it. The people can, the people in its might. Again I ask you, when you say the people, do you mean the populace? You do. What power can the populace wield? It can run wild. It can burn and slay for a time. But enduring power it cannot wield, because power demands qualities which the populace does not possess, or it would not be populace. The inevitable, tragic corollary of civilization is populace. For the rest, abuses can be corrected by equity, and equity, if it is not found in the enlightened, is not to be found at all. Necker is to set about correcting abuses and limiting privileges. That is decided. To that end the States General are to assemble. And a promising beginning we have made in Brittany, as heaven hears me, cried Philippe. Oh, that is nothing. Naturally the nobles will not yield without a struggle. It is a futile and ridiculous struggle, but then, it is human nature, I suppose, to be futile and ridiculous. De Vilmorin became witheringly sarcastic. Probably you will also qualify the shooting of maybe as futile and ridiculous. I should even be prepared to hear you argue in defense of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azyr that his gamekeeper was merciful in shooting maybe, since the alternative would have been a life sentence to the galleys. André-Louis drank the remainder of his chocolate, set down his cup and pushed back his chair, his breakfast done. I confess that I have not your big charity, my dear Philippe. I am touched by Maybe's fate. But, having conquered the shock of this news to my emotions, I do not forget that, after all, Maybe was thieving when he met his death. De Vilmorin heaved himself up in his indignation. That is the point of view to be expected in one who is the assistant fiscal intendant of a nobleman, and the delegate of a nobleman to the States of Brittany. Philippe, is that just? You are angry with me, he cried in real solicitude. I am hurt, Vilmorin admitted. I am deeply hurt by your attitude. And I am not alone in resenting your reactionary tendencies. Do you know that the literary chamber is seriously considering your expulsion? André-Louis shrugged. That neither surprises nor troubles me. De Vilmorin swept on passionately. Sometimes I think that you have no heart. With you it is always the law, never equity. It occurs to me, André, that I was mistaken in coming to you. You are not likely to be of assistance to me in my interview with M. de Circadia." He took up his hat, clearly with the intention of departing. André-Louis sprang up and caught him by the arm. "I vow," said he, "that this is the last time ever I shall consent to talk law or politics with you, Philippe. I love you too well to quarrel with you over other men's affairs." "But I make them my own," Philippe insisted vehemently. "Of course you do, and I love you for it. It is right that you should. You are to be a priest, and everybody's business is a priest's business. Whereas I am a lawyer, the fiscal intendant of a nobleman, as you say, and a lawyer's business is the business of his client. That is the difference between us. Nevertheless, you are not going to shake me off. But I tell you frankly, now that I come to think of it, that I should prefer you did not see M. de Circadia with me. Your duty to your client cannot be a help to me." His wrath had passed, but his determination remained firm, based upon the reason he gave. "Very well," said André-Louis. "It shall be as you please. But nothing shall prevent me at least from walking with you as far as the chateau, and waiting for you while you make your appeal to M. de Circadia." And so they left the house good friends, for the sweetness of M. de Vilmorin's nature did not admit of rancor, and together they took their way up the steep main street of Gavrillac. Chapter 2. The Aristocrat. The sleepy village of Gavrillac, a half-league removed from the main road to Rennes, and therefore undisturbed by the world's traffic, lay in a curve of the river Mayu at the foot, and straggling halfway up the slope, of the shallow hill that was crowned by the squat manor. By the time Gavrillac had paid tribute to its seigneur, partly in money and partly in service, tithes to the church and imposts to the king, it was hard put to it to keep body and soul together with what remained. Yet, hard as conditions were in Gavrillac, they were not so hard as in many other parts of France, not half so hard, for instance, as with the wretched feudatories of the great lord of La Tour d'Azur, whose vast possessions were at one point separated from this little village by the waters of the Mayu. The Château de Gavrillac owed such seigneurial airs as might be claimed for it to its dominant position above the village rather than to any feature of its own. Built of granite, like all the rest of Gavrillac, though mellowed by some 3 centuries of existence, it was a squat, flat-fronted edifice of 2 stories, each lighted by 4 windows with external wooden shutters, and flanked at either end by 2 square towers or pavilions under extinguisher roofs. Standing well back in a garden, denuded now, but very pleasant in summer, and immediately fronted by a fine sweep of balustrade terrace, it looked, what indeed it was and always had been, the residence of unpretentious folk who found more interest in husbandry than in adventure. Quentin de Circadia, Lord of Gavrillac, Seigneur de Gavrillac was all the vague title that he bore, as his forefathers had borne before him, derived no man knew whence or how, confirmed the impression that his house conveyed. Rude as the granite itself, he had never sought the experience of courts, had not even taken service in the armies of his king. He left it to his younger brother, Etienne, to represent the family in those exalted spheres. His own interests from earliest years had been centered in his woods and pastures. He hunted, and he cultivated his acres, and superficially he appeared to be little better than any of his rustic métayers. He kept no state, or at least no state commensurate with his position or with the tastes of his niece Aline de Circadia. Aline, having spent some 2 years in the court atmosphere of Versailles under the aegis of her uncle Etienne, had ideas very different from those of her uncle Quentin of what was befitting seigneurial dignity. But though this only child of a third Circadia had exercised, ever since she was left an orphan at the early age of 4, a tyrannical rule over the Lord of Gavrillac, who had been father and mother to her, she had never yet succeeded in beating down his stubbornness on that score. She did not yet despair, persistence being a dominant note in her character, although she had been assiduously and fruitlessly at work since her return from the great world of Versailles some 3 months ago. She was walking on the terrace when André-Louis and M. de Vilmorin arrived. Her slight body was wrapped against the chill air in a white pelisse. Her head was encased in a close-fitting bonnet, edged with white fur. It was caught tight in a knot of pale blue ribbon on the right of her chin. On the left a long ringlet of corn-colored hair had been permitted to escape. The keen air had whipped so much of her cheeks as was presented to it, and seemed to have added sparkle to eyes that were of darkest blue. André-Louis and M. de Vilmorin had been known to her from childhood. The 3 had been playmates once, and André-Louis, in view of his spiritual relationship with her uncle, she called her cousin. The cousinly relations had persisted between these 2 long after Philippe de Vilmorin had outgrown the earlier intimacy, and had become to her Monsieur de Vilmorin. She waved her hand to them in greeting as they advanced and stood, an entrancing picture and fully conscious of it, to await them at the end of the terrace nearest the short avenue by which they approached. "If you come to see Monsieur my uncle, you come inopportunely, messrs," she told them, a certain feverishness in her air. "He is closely, oh so very closely, engaged." "We will wait, mademoiselle," said M. de Vilmorin, bowing gallantly over the hand she extended to him. Indeed, who would haste to the uncle that may tarry a moment with the niece? "L'Abbé," she teased him, "when you are in orders I shall take you for my confessor. You have so ready and sympathetic an understanding." "But no curiosity," said André-Louis. "You haven't thought of that." "I wonder what you mean, Cousin André." "Well, you may," laughed Philippe, "for no one ever knows." And then, his glance straying across the terrace settled upon a carriage that was drawn up before the door of the chateau. It was a vehicle such as was often to be seen in the streets of a great city, but rarely in the country. It was a beautifully sprung two-horse cabriolet of walnut, with a varnish upon it like a sheet of glass and little pastoral scenes exquisitely painted on the panels of the door. It was built to carry 2 persons, with a box in front for the coachman, and a stand behind for the footman. This stand was empty, but the footman paced before the door, and as he emerged now from behind the vehicle into the range of M. de Vilmorin's vision, he displayed the resplendent blue and gold livery of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azyr. "Why," he exclaimed, "is it M. de la Tour d'Azyr who is with your uncle?" "It is, monsieur," said she, a world of mystery in voice and eyes, of which M. de Vilmorin observed nothing. "Ah, pardon," he bowed low, hat in hand. "Serviteur, mademoiselle," and he turned to depart towards the house. "Shall I come with you, Philippe?" André-Louis called after him. "It would be ungallant to assume that you would prefer it," said M. de Vilmorin, with a glance at mademoiselle. "Nor do I think it would serve. If you will wait." De Vilmorin strode off. Mademoiselle, after a moment's blank pause, laughed ripplingly. "Now where is he going in such a hurry?" "To see M. de la Tour d'Azyr as well as your uncle, I should say." "But he cannot. They cannot see him. Did I not say that they are very closely engaged?" "You don't ask me why, André." There was an arch mysteriousness about her, a latent something that may have been elation or amusement, or perhaps both. André-Louis could not determine it. "Since obviously you are all eagerness to tell, why should I ask?" quoth he. "If you are caustic I shall not tell you even if you ask." "Oh yes, I will. It will teach you to treat me with the respect that is my due. I hope I shall never fail in that. Less than ever when you learn that I am very closely concerned in the visit of M. de la Tour d'Azyr. I am the object of this visit." And she looked at him with sparkling eyes and lips parted in laughter. "The rest, you would seem to imply, is obvious. But I am a dolt, if you please, for it is not obvious to me. Why, stupid, he comes to ask my hand in marriage." "Good God!" said André-Louis and stared at her, chapfallen. She drew back from him a little with a frown and an upward tilt of her chin. "It surprises you?" "It disgusts me," said he bluntly. "In fact, I don't believe it. You are amusing yourself with me." For a moment she put aside her visible annoyance to remove his doubts. "I am quite serious, monsieur. There came a formal letter to my uncle this morning from M. de la Tour d'Azyr, announcing the visit and its object. I will not say that it did not surprise us a little." "Oh, I see," cried André-Louis in relief. "I understand. For a moment I had almost feared—" He broke off, looked at her, and shrugged. "Why do you stop?" "You had almost feared that Versailles had been wasted upon me. That I should permit the courtship of me to be conducted like that of any village wench. It was stupid of you. I am being sought in proper form at my uncle's hands. Is his consent, then, all that matters according to Versailles? What else? There is your own." She laughed. "I am a dutiful niece, when it suits me. And will it suit you to be dutiful if your uncle accepts this monstrous proposal?" "Monstrous?" She bridled. "And why monstrous, if you please?" "For a score of reasons," he answered irritably. "Give me one," she challenged him. "He is twice your age." "Hardly so much," said she. "He is 45 at least. But he looks no more than 30. He is very handsome, so much you will admit, nor will you deny that he is very wealthy and very powerful, the greatest nobleman in Brittany. He will make me a great lady. God made you that, Aline. Come, that's better. Sometimes you can almost be polite." And she moved along the terrace, André-Louis pacing beside her. "I can be more than that to show reason why you should not let this beast befoul the beautiful thing that God has made." She frowned and her lips tightened. "You are speaking of my future husband," she reproved him. His lips tightened too, his pale face grew paler. "And is it so?" It is settled, then? Your uncle is to agree? You are to be sold thus, lovelessly, into bondage to a man you do not know. I had dreamed of better things for you, Aline. Better than to be Marquise de la Tour d'Azyr? He made a gesture of exasperation. Are men and women nothing more than names? Do the souls of them count for nothing? Is there no joy in life, no happiness, that wealth and pleasure and empty high-sounding titles are to be its only aims? I had set you high, so high, Aline, a thing scarce earthly. There is joy in your heart, intelligence in your mind, and, as I thought, the vision that pierces husks and shams to claim the core of reality for its own. Yet you will surrender all for a parcel of make-believe. You will sell your soul and your body to be Marquise de la Tour d'Azyr. You are indelicate, said she, and though she frowned her eyes laughed. And you go headlong to conclusions. My uncle will not consent to more than to allow my consent to be sought. We understand each other, my uncle and I. I am not to be bartered like a turnip. He stood still to face her, his eyes glowing, a flush creeping into his pale cheeks. You have been torturing me to amuse yourself, he cried. Ah, well, I forgive you out of my relief. Again you go too fast, cousin André. I have permitted my uncle to consent that le Marquis shall make his court to me. I like the look of the gentleman. I am flattered by his preference when I consider his eminence. It is an eminence that I may find it desirable to share. Le Marquis does not look as if he were a dullard. It should be interesting to be wooed by him. It may be more interesting still to marry him, and I think, when all is considered, that I shall probably, very probably, decide to do so. He looked at her, looked at the sweet, challenging loveliness of that childlike face so tightly framed in the oval of white fur, and all the life seemed to go out of his own countenance. God help you, Aline, he groaned. She stamped her foot. He was really very exasperating and something presumptuous too, she thought. You are insolent, monsieur. It is never insolent to pray, Aline. And I did no more than pray, as I shall continue to do. You'll need my prayers, I think. You are insufferable. She was growing angry as he saw by the deepening frown, the heightened color. That is because I suffer. Oh, Aline, little cousin, think well of what you do. Think well of the realities you will be bartering for these shams. The realities that you will never know because these cursed shams will block your way to them. When M. de la Tour d'Azyr comes to make his court, study him well, consult your fine instincts, leave your own noble nature free to judge this animal by its intuitions. Consider that. I consider, monsieur, that you presume upon the kindness I have always shown you. You abuse the position of toleration in which you stand. Who are you? What are you, that you should have the insolence to take this tone with me? He bowed, instantly his cold, detached self again, and resumed the mockery that was his natural habit. My congratulations, mademoiselle, upon the readiness with which you begin to adapt yourself to the great role you are to play. Do you adapt yourself also, monsieur? She retorted angrily, and turned her shoulder to him. To be as the dust beneath the haughty feet of Madame la Marquise. I hope I shall know my place in future. The phrase arrested her. She turned to him again, and he perceived that her eyes were shining now suspiciously. In an instant the mockery in him was quenched in contrition. Lord, what a beast I am, Aline, he cried as he advanced. Forgive me if you can. Almost had she turned to sue forgiveness from him. But his contrition removed the need. I'll try, said she, provided that you undertake not to offend again. But I shall, said he. I'm like that. I will fight to save you from yourself if need be, whether you forgive me or not. They were standing so, confronting each other a little breathlessly, a little defiantly, when the others issued from the porch. First came the Marquis of la Tour d'Azyr, Count of Souls, Knight of the Orders of the Holy Ghost and St. Louis, and Brigadier in the armies of the King. He was a tall, graceful man, upright and soldierly of carriage, with his head disdainfully set upon his shoulders. He was magnificently dressed in a full-skirted coat of mulberry velvet that was laced with gold. His waistcoat, of velvet too, was of a golden apricot color. His breeches and stockings were of black silk, and his lacquered red-heeled shoes were buckled in diamonds. His powdered hair was tied behind in a broad ribbon of watered silk. He carried a little three-cornered hat under his arm, and a gold-hilted slender dress-sword hung at his side. Considering him now in complete detachment, observing the magnificence of him, the elegance of his movements, the great air, blending in so extraordinary a manner disdain and graciousness, André-Louis trembled for Aline. Here was a practiced, irresistible wooer, whose bonds fortunes were become a byword, a man who had hitherto been the despair of dowagers with marriageable daughters, and the desolation of husbands with attractive wives. He was immediately followed by M. de Circadia, in completest contrast. On legs of the shortest, the Lord of Gavrillac carried a body that at 45 was beginning to incline to corpulence and an enormous head containing an indifferent allotment of intelligence. His countenance was pink and blotchy, liberally branded by the smallpox which had almost extinguished him in youth. In dress he was careless to the point of untidiness, and to this and to the fact that he had never married, disregarding the first duty of a gentleman to provide himself with an heir, he owed the character of misogynist attributed to him by the countryside. After M. de Circadia came M. de Vilmorin, very pale and self-contained, with tight lips and an overcast brow. To meet them, there stepped from the carriage a very elegant young gentleman, the Chevalier de Chabrelaine, M. de la Tour d'Azur's cousin, who whilst awaiting his return had watched with considerable interest, his own presence unsuspected, the perambulations of André-Louis and Mademoiselle. Perceiving Aline, M. de la Tour d'Azur detached himself from the others, and lengthening his stride came straight across the terrace to her. To André-Louis the Marquis inclined his head with that mixture of courtliness and condescension which he used. Socially, the young lawyer stood in a curious position. By virtue of the theory of his birth, he ranked neither as noble nor as simple, but stood somewhere between the two classes, and whilst claimed by neither he was used familiarly by both. Coldly now he returned M. de la Tour d'Azur's greeting, and discreetly removed himself to go and join his friend. The Marquis took the hand that Mademoiselle extended to him, and bowing over it, bore it to his lips. "Mademoiselle," he said, looking into the blue depths of her eyes, that met his gaze smiling and untroubled, "Monsieur your uncle does me the honor to permit that I pay my homage to you. Will you, Mademoiselle, do me the honor to receive me when I come tomorrow? I shall have something of great importance for your ear." "Of importance, le Marquis? You almost frighten me." But there was no fear on the serene little face in its furred hood. It was not for nothing that she had graduated in the Versailles School of Artificialities. "That," said he, "is very far from my design. But of importance to yourself, monsieur, or to me?" "To us both, I hope," he answered her, a world of meaning in his fine, ardent eyes. "You whet my curiosity, monsieur, and of course I am a dutiful niece. It follows that I shall be honored to receive you." "Not honored, mademoiselle, you will confer the honor. Tomorrow at this hour, then, I shall have the felicity to wait upon you." He bowed again, and again he bore her fingers to his lips, what time she curtsied. Thereupon, with no more than this formal breaking of the ice, they parted. She was a little breathless now, a little dazzled by the beauty of the man, his princely air, and the confidence of power he seemed to radiate. Involuntarily almost, she contrasted him with his critic, the lean and impudent André-Louis in his plain brown coat and steel-buckled shoes, and she felt guilty of an unpardonable offense in having permitted even one word of that presumptuous criticism. Tomorrow le Marquis would come to offer her a great position, a great rank. And already she had derogated from the increase of dignity accruing to her from his very intention to translate her to so great an eminence. Not again would she suffer it. Not again would she be so weak and childish as to permit André-Louis to utter his ribald comments upon a man by comparison with whom he was no better than a lackey. Thus argued vanity and ambition with her better self, and to her vast annoyance her better self would not admit entire conviction. Meanwhile, M. de la Tour d'Azur was climbing into his carriage. He had spoken a word of farewell to M. de Circadia, and he had also had a word for M. de Vilmorin, in reply to which M. de Vilmorin had bowed in assenting silence. The carriage rolled away, the powdered footman in blue and gold very stiff behind it, M. de la Tour d'Azur bowing to Mademoiselle, who waved to him in answer. Then M. de Vilmorin put his arm through that of André-Louis and said to him, "Come, André." "But you'll stay to dine, both of you?" cried the hospitable Lord of Gavrillac. "We'll drink a certain toast," he added, winking an eye that strayed towards Mademoiselle, who was approaching. He had no subtleties, good soul that he was. De Vilmorin deplored an appointment that prevented him doing himself the honor. He was very stiff and formal. "And you, André?" "I? Oh, I share the appointment, godfather," he lied, "and I have a superstition against toasts." He had no wish to remain. He was angry with Aline for her smiling reception of M. de la Tour d'Azur and the sordid bargain he saw her set on making. He was suffering from the loss of an illusion. Chapter 3. The eloquence of M. de Vilmorin. As they walked down the hill together, it was now M. de Vilmorin who was silent and preoccupied, André-Louis who was talkative. He had chosen woman as a subject for his present discourse. He claimed, quite unjustifiably, to have discovered woman that morning, and the things he had to say of the sex were unflattering, and occasionally almost gross. De Vilmorin, having ascertained the subject, did not listen. Singular though it may seem in a young French abbé of his day, M. de Vilmorin was not interested in woman. Poor Philippe was in several ways exceptional. Opposite the Breton Arme, the inn and posting house at the entrance of the village of Gavrillac, M. de Vilmorin interrupted his companion just as he was soaring to the dizziest heights of caustic invective, and André-Louis, restored thereby to actualities, observed the carriage of M. de la Tour d'Azyr standing before the door of the hostelry. "I don't believe you've been listening to me," said he. "Had you been less interested in what you were saying, you might have observed it sooner and spared your breath. The fact is, you disappoint me, André. You seem to have forgotten what we went for. I have an appointment here with M. le Marquis. He desires to hear me further in the matter. Up there at Gavrillac I could accomplish nothing. The time was ill-chosen as it happened. But I have hopes of M. le Marquis." "Hopes of what?" "That he will make what reparation lies in his power. Provide for the widow and the orphans. Why else should he desire to hear me further?" "Unusual condescension," said André-Louis, and quoted Timeo Danaos et dona ferentes. "Why?" asked Philippe. "Let us go and discover, unless you consider that I shall be in the way." Into a room on the right, rendered private to M. le Marquis for so long as he should elect to honor it, the young men were ushered by the host. A fire of logs was burning brightly at the room's far end, and by this sat now M. de la Tour d'Azyr and his cousin, the Chevalier de Chaberlain. Both rose as M. de Vilmorin came in. André-Louis, following, paused to close the door. "You oblige me by your prompt courtesy, M. de Vilmorin," said the Marquis, but in a tone so cold as to belie the politeness of his words. "A chair, I beg. Ah, Moreau?" The note was frigidly interrogative. "He accompanies you, monsieur?" he asked. "If you please, M. le Marquis." "Why not? Find yourself a seat, Moreau." He spoke over his shoulder as to a lackey. "It is good of you, monsieur," said Philippe, "to have offered me this opportunity of continuing the subject that took me so fruitlessly, as it happens, to Gavrillac." The Marquis crossed his legs and held one of his fine hands to the blaze. He replied, without troubling to turn to the young man, who was slightly behind him. "The goodness of my request we will leave out of question for the moment," said he darkly, and M. de Chaberlain laughed. André-Louis thought him easily moved to mirth, and almost envied him the faculty. "But I am grateful," Philippe insisted, "that you should condescend to hear me plead their cause." The Marquis stared at him over his shoulder. "Whose cause?" quoth he. "Why, the cause of the widow and orphans of this unfortunate maybe." The Marquis looked from Vilmorin to the Chevalier, and again the Chevalier laughed, slapping his leg this time. "I think," said M. de la Tour d'Azyr slowly, "that we are at cross purposes. I asked you to come here because the Château de Gavrillac was hardly a suitable place in which to carry our discussion further, and because I hesitated to incommode you by suggesting that you should come all the way to Azyr. But my object is connected with certain expressions that you let fall up there. It is on the subject of those expressions, monsieur, that I would hear you further, if you will honor me." André-Louis began to apprehend that there was something sinister in the air. He was a man of quick intuitions, quicker far than those of M. de Vilmorin, who evinced no more than a mild surprise. "I am at a loss, monsieur," said he. "To what expressions does monsieur allude?" "It seems, monsieur, that I must refresh your memory." The Marquis crossed his legs and swung sideways on his chair, so that at last he directly faced M. de Vilmorin. "You spoke, monsieur, and however mistaken you may have been, you spoke very eloquently, too eloquently almost, it seemed to me, of the infamy of such a deed as the act of summary justice upon this thieving fellow may be, or whatever his name may be. Infamy was the precise word you used. You did not retract that word when I had the honor to inform you that it was by my orders that my gamekeeper Benet proceeded as he did." "If," said M. de Vilmorin, "the deed was infamous, its infamy is not modified by the rank, however exalted, of the person responsible. Rather is it aggravated." "Ah," said M. le Marquis, and drew a gold snuff-box from his pocket. "You say, if the deed was infamous, monsieur. Am I to understand that you are no longer as convinced as you appeared to be of its infamy?" De Vilmorin's fine face wore a look of perplexity. He did not understand the drift of this. "It occurs to me, M. le Marquis, in view of your readiness to assume responsibility, that you must believe justification for the deed which is not apparent to myself." "That is better. That is distinctly better." The Marquis took snuff delicately, dusting the fragments from the fine lace at his throat. "You realize that with an imperfect understanding of these matters, not being yourself a landowner, you may have rushed to unjustifiable conclusions. That is indeed the case. May it be a warning to you, monsieur. When I tell you that for months past I have been annoyed by similar depredations, you will perhaps understand that it had become necessary to employ a deterrent sufficiently strong to put an end to them. Now that the risk is known, I do not think there will be any more prowling in my coverts. And there is more in it than that, M. de Vilmorin. It is not the poaching that annoys me so much as the contempt for my absolute and inviolable rights. There is, monsieur, as you cannot fail to have observed, an evil spirit of insubordination in the air, and there is one only way in which to meet it. To tolerate it, in however slight a degree, to show leniency, however leniently disposed, would entail having recourse to still harsher measures tomorrow. You understand me, I am sure, and you will also, I am sure, appreciate the condescension of what amounts to an explanation from me where I cannot admit that any explanations were due. If anything in what I have said is still obscure to you, I refer you to the game laws, which your lawyer friend there will expound for you at need. With that the gentleman swung round again to face the fire. It appeared to convey the intimation that the interview was at an end. And yet this was not by any means the intimation that it conveyed to the watchful, puzzled, vaguely uneasy André-Louis. It was, thought he, a very curious, a very suspicious oration. It affected to explain, with a politeness of terms and a calculated insolence of tone, whilst in fact it could only serve to stimulate and goad a man of M. de Vilmorin's opinions. And that is precisely what it did. He rose. Are there in the world no laws but game laws? He demanded angrily. Have you never by any chance heard of the laws of humanity? The Marquis sighed wearily. What have I to do with the laws of humanity? He wondered. De Vilmorin looked at him a moment in speechless amazement. Nothing, le Marquis. That is, alas, too obvious. I hope you will remember it in the hour when you may wish to appeal to those laws which you now deride. De la Tour d'Azyr threw back his head sharply, his high-bred face imperious. Now what precisely shall that mean? It is not the first time today that you have made use of dark sayings that I could almost believe to veil the presumption of a threat. Not a threat, le Marquis, a warning. A warning that such deeds as these against God's creatures. Oh, you may sneer, monsieur, but they are God's creatures even as you or I, neither more nor less, deeply though the reflection may wound your pride. In his eyes. Of your charity, spare me a sermon, l'Abbé. You mock, monsieur. You laugh. Will you laugh, I wonder, when God presents his reckoning to you for the blood and plunder with which your hands are full? Monsieur. The word, sharp as the crack of a whip, was from M. de Chaberlain, who bounded to his feet. But instantly the Marquis repressed him. Sit down, Chevalier. You are interrupting l'Abbé, and I should like to hear him further. He interests me profoundly. In the background André-Louis too had risen, brought to his feet by alarm, by the evil that he saw written on the handsome face of M. de la Tour d'Azyr. He approached and touched his friend upon the arm. Better be going, Philippe, said he. But M. de Vilmorin, caught in the relentless grip of passions long repressed, was being hurried by them recklessly along. Oh, monsieur, said he, consider what you are and what you will be. Consider how you and your kind live by abuses, and consider the harvest that abuses must ultimately bring. Revolutionist, said M. le Marquis contemptuously. You have the effrontery to stand before my face and offer me this stinking cant of your modern so-called intellectuals. Is it cant, monsieur? Do you believe in your soul that it is cant? Is it cant that the feudal grip is on all things that live, crushing them like grapes in the press, to its own profit? Does it not exercise its rights upon the waters of the river, the fire that bakes the poor man's bread of grass and barley, on the wind that turns the mill? The peasant cannot take a step upon the road, cross a crazy bridge over a river, buy an ell of cloth in the village market, without meeting feudal rapacity, without being taxed in feudal dues. Is not that enough, le Marquis? Must you also demand his wretched life in payment for the least infringement of your sacred privileges, careless of what widows or orphans you dedicate to woe? Will not content you but that your shadow must lie like a curse upon the land? And do you think in your pride that France, this job among the nations, will suffer it forever? He paused as if for a reply. But none came. The Marquis considered him, strangely silent, a half-smile of disdain at the corners of his lips, an ominous hardness in his eyes. Again André-Louis tugged at his friend's sleeve. Philippe. Philippe shook him off and plunged on, fanatically. Do you see nothing of the gathering clouds that herald the coming of the storm? You imagine, perhaps, that these States General summoned by M. Necker and promised for next year are to do nothing but devise fresh means of extortion to liquidate the bankruptcy of the state? You delude yourselves, as you shall find. The third estate, which you despise, will prove itself the preponderating force, and it will find a way to make an end of this canker of privilege that is devouring the vitals of this unfortunate country. Le Marquis shifted in his chair and spoke at last. You have, monsieur, said he, a very dangerous gift of eloquence. And it is of yourself rather than of your subject. For after all, what do you offer me? A réchauffé of the dishes served to out-at-elbow enthusiasts in the provincial literary chambers, compounded of the effusions of your Voltaires and Jean-Jacques and such dirty-fingered scribblers. You have not among all your philosophers one with the wit to understand that we are an order consecrated by antiquity, that for our rights and privileges we have behind us the authority of centuries. Humanity, monsieur, Philippe replied, is more ancient than nobility. Human rights are contemporary with man. The Marquis laughed and shrugged. That is the answer I might have expected. It has the right note of cant that distinguishes the philosophers. And then M. de Chamberlain spoke. You go a long way round, he criticized his cousin on a note of impatience. But I am getting there, he was answered. I desire to make quite certain first. Faith, you should have no doubt by now. I have none. The Marquis rose and turned again to M. de Vilmorin, who had understood nothing of that brief exchange. M. l'Abbé, said he once more, you have a very dangerous gift of eloquence. I can conceive of men being swayed by it. Had you been born a gentleman, you would not so easily have acquired these false views that you express. De Vilmorin stared blankly, uncomprehending. Had I been born a gentleman, do you say? Quoth he in a slow, bewildered voice. But I was born a gentleman. My race is as old, my blood as good as yours, monsieur. From M. le Marquis there was a slight play of eyebrows, a vague, indulgent smile. His dark, liquid eyes looked squarely into the face of M. de Vilmorin. You have been deceived in that, I fear. Deceived? Your sentiments betray the indiscretion of which madame your mother must have been guilty. The brutally affronting words were sped beyond recall, and the lips that had uttered them, coldly as if they had been the merest commonplace, remained calm and faintly sneering. A dead silence followed. André-Louis' wits were numbed. He stood aghast, all thought suspended in him, what time M. de Vilmorin's eyes continued fixed upon M. de la Tour d'Azur's, as if searching there for a meaning that eluded him. Quite suddenly he understood the vile affront. The blood leapt to his face, fire blazed in his gentle eyes. A convulsive quiver shook him. Then, with an inarticulate cry, he leaned forward, and with his open hand struck M. le Marquis full and hard upon his sneering face. In a flash M. de Chamberlain was on his feet between the two men. Too late André-Louis had seen the trap. La Tour d'Azur's words were but as a move in a game of chess, calculated to exasperate his opponent into some such counter-move as this. A counter-move that left him entirely at the other's mercy. Le Marquis looked on, very white save where M. de Vilmorin's fingerprints began slowly to color his face, but he said nothing more. Instead, it was M. de Chamberlain who now did the talking, taking up his preconcerted part in this vile game. You realize, monsieur, what you have done, said he coldly to Philippe, and you realize, of course, what must inevitably follow. M. de Vilmorin had realized nothing. The poor young man had acted upon impulse, upon the instinct of decency and honor, never counting the consequences. But he realized them now at the sinister invitation of M. de Chamberlain, and if he desired to avoid these consequences, it was out of respect for his priestly vocation, which strictly forbade such adjustments of disputes as M. de Chamberlain was clearly thrusting upon him. He drew back. Let one affront wipe out the other, said he in a dull voice. The balance is still in M. le Marquis' favor. Let that content him. Impossible. The Chevalier's lips came together tightly. Thereafter he was suavity itself, but very firm. A blow has been struck, monsieur. I think I am correct in saying that such a thing has never happened before to M. le Marquis in all his life. If you felt yourself affronted, you had but to ask the satisfaction due from one gentleman to another. Your action would seem to confirm the assumption that you found so offensive. But it does not on that account render you immune from the consequences. It was, you see, M. de Chamberlain's part to heap coals upon this fire, to make quite sure that their victim should not escape them. I desire no immunity, flashed back the young seminarist, stung by this fresh goad. After all, he was nobly born, and the traditions of his class were strong upon him, stronger far than the seminarist's schooling in humility. He owed it to himself, to his honor, to be killed rather than avoid the consequences of the thing he had done. "But he does not wear a sword, messers?" cried André-Louis aghast. "That is easily amended. He may have the loan of mine." "I mean, messers," André-Louis insisted, between fear for his friend and indignation, "that it is not his habit to wear a sword, that he has never worn one, that he is untutored in its uses. He is a seminarist, a postulant for holy orders, already half a priest, and so forbidden from such an engagement as you propose." "All that he should have remembered before he struck a blow," said M. de Chamberlain politely. "The blow was deliberately provoked," raged André-Louis. Then he recovered himself, though the other's haughty stare had no part in that recovery. "Oh my God, I talk in vain. How is one to argue against a purpose formed? Come away, Philippe. Don't you see the trap?" De Vilmorin cut him short and flung him off. "Be quiet, André. Le Marquis is entirely in the right." "Le Marquis is in the right?" André-Louis let his arms fall helplessly. This man he loved above all other living men was caught in the snare of the world's insanity. He was baring his breast to the knife for the sake of a vague, distorted sense of the honor due to himself. It was not that he did not see the trap. It was that his honor compelled him to disdain consideration of it. To André-Louis in that moment he seemed a singularly tragic figure. Noble, perhaps, but very pitiful. Chapter 4. The Heritage. It was M. de Vilmorin's desire that the matter should be settled out of hand. In this he was at once objective and subjective. A prey to emotions sadly at conflict with his priestly vocation, he was above all in haste to have done, so that he might resume a frame of mind more proper to it. Also he feared himself a little, by which I mean that his honor feared his nature. The circumstances of his education, and the goal that for some years now he had kept in view, had robbed him of much of that spirited brutality that is the birthright of the male. He had grown timid and gentle as a woman. Aware of it, he feared that once the heat of his passion was spent he might betray a dishonoring weakness in the ordeal. Le Marquis, on his side, was no less eager for an immediate settlement, and since they had M. de Chamberlain to act for his cousin, and André-Louis to serve as witness for M. de Vilmorin, there was nothing to delay them. And so, within a few minutes, all arrangements were concluded, and you behold that sinisterly intentioned little group of four assembled in the afternoon sunshine on the bowling green behind the inn. They were entirely private, screened more or less from the windows of the house by a ramage of trees, which, if leafless now, was at least dense enough to provide an effective lattice. There were no formalities over measurements of blades or selection of ground. Le Marquis removed his sword belt and scabbard, but declined, not considering it worthwhile for the sake of so negligible an opponent, to divest himself either of his shoes or his coat. Tall, lithe, and athletic, he stood to face the no less tall, but very delicate and frail M. de Vilmorin. The latter also disdained to make any of the usual preparations. Since he recognized that it could avail him nothing to strip, he came on guard fully dressed, 2 hectic spots above the cheekbones burning on his otherwise grey face. De Chamberlain, leaning upon a cane, for he had relinquished his sword to M. de Vilmorin, looked on with quiet interest. Facing him on the other side of the combatants stood André-Louis, the palest of the four, staring from fevered eyes, twisting and untwisting clammy hands. His every instinct was to fling himself between the antagonists, to protest against and frustrate this meeting. That sane impulse was curbed, however, by the consciousness of its futility. To calm him, he clung to the conviction that the issue could not really be very serious. If the obligations of Philippe's honor compelled him to cross swords with the man he had struck, M. de la Tour d'Azur's birth compelled him no less to do no serious hurt to the unfledged lad he had so grievously provoked. Le Marquis, after all, was a man of honor. He could intend no more than to administer a lesson, sharp perhaps, but one by which his opponent must live to profit. André-Louis clung obstinately to that for comfort. Steel beat on steel and the men engaged. The Marquis presented to his opponent the narrow edge of his upright body, his knees slightly flexed and converted into living springs, whilst M. de Vilmorin stood squarely, a full target, his knees wooden. Honor and the spirit of fair play alike cried out against such a match. The encounter was very short, of course. In youth, Philippe had received the tutoring in swordplay that was given to every boy born into his station of life, and so he knew at least the rudiments of what was now expected of him. But what could rudiments avail him here? 3 disengages completed the exchanges, and then without any haste the Marquis slid his right foot along the moist turf, his long, graceful body extending itself in a lunge that went under M. de Vilmorin's clumsy guard, and with the utmost deliberation he drove his blade through the young man's vitals. André-Louis sprang forward just in time to catch his friend's body under the armpits as it sank. Then, his own legs bending beneath the weight of it, he went down with his burden until he was kneeling on the damp turf. Philippe's limp head lay against André-Louis' left shoulder. Philippe's relaxed arms trailed at his sides. The blood welled and bubbled from the ghastly wound to saturate the poor lad's garments. With white face and twitching lips, André-Louis looked up at M. de la Tour d'Azyr, who stood surveying his work with a countenance of grave but remorseless interest. "You have killed him," cried André-Louis. "Of course." The Marquis ran a lace handkerchief along his blade to wipe it. As he let the dainty fabric fall, he explained himself. He had, as I told him, a too dangerous gift of eloquence. And he turned away, leaving completest understanding with André-Louis. Still supporting the limp, draining body, the young man called to him. "Come back, you cowardly murderer, and make yourself quite safe by killing me too." The Marquis half turned, his face dark with anger. Then M. de Chamberlain set a restraining hand upon his arm. Although a party throughout to the deed, the Chevalier was a little appalled now that it was done. He had not the high stomach of M. de la Tour d'Azyr, and he was a good deal younger. "Come away," he said. "The lad is raving." They were friends. "You heard what he said?" quoth the Marquis. "Nor can he or you or any man deny it," flung back André-Louis. "Yourself, monsieur, you made confession when you gave me now the reason why you killed him. You did it because you feared him." "If that were true, what then?" asked the great gentleman. "Do you ask? Do you understand of life and humanity nothing but how to wear a coat and dress your hair? Oh yes, and to handle weapons against boys and priests? Have you no mind to think, no soul into which you can turn its vision? Must you be told that it is a coward's part to kill the thing he fears, and doubly a coward's part to kill in this way? Had you stabbed him in the back with a knife, you would have shown the courage of your vileness. It would have been a vileness undisguised. But you feared the consequences of that, powerful as you are, and so you shelter your cowardice under the pretext of a duel." The Marquis shook off his cousin's hand and took a step forward, holding now his sword like a whip. But again the Chevalier caught and held him. "No, no, Gervais. Let be, in God's name." "Let him come, monsieur," raved André-Louis, his voice thick and concentrated. "Let him complete his coward's work on me, and thus make himself safe from a coward's wages." De Chamberlain let his cousin go. He came white to the lips, his eyes glaring at the lad who so recklessly insulted him. And then he checked. It may be that he remembered suddenly the relationship in which this young man was popularly believed to stand to the Seigneur de Gavrillac, and the well-known affection in which the Seigneur held him. And so he may have realized that if he pushed this matter further, he might find himself upon the horns of a dilemma. He would be confronted with the alternatives of shedding more blood, and so embroiling himself with the Lord of Gavrillac at a time when that gentleman's friendship was of the first importance to him, or else of withdrawing with such hurt to his dignity as must impair his authority in the countryside hereafter. Be it so or otherwise, the fact remains that he stopped short. Then, with an incoherent ejaculation between anger and contempt, he tossed his arms, turned on his heel and strode off quickly with his cousin. When the landlord and his people came, they found André-Louis, his arms about the body of his dead friend, murmuring passionately into the deaf ear that rested almost against his lips. "Philippe! Speak to me, Philippe! Philippe! Don't you hear me? O God of heaven! Philippe!" At a glance they saw that here neither priest nor doctor could avail. The cheek that lay against André-Louis's was leaden-hued, the half-open eyes were glazed, and there was a little froth of blood upon the vacuously parted lips. Half blinded by tears, André-Louis stumbled after them when they bore the body into the inn. Upstairs in the little room to which they conveyed it, he knelt by the bed, and holding the dead man's hand in both his own, he swore to him out of his impotent rage that M. de la Tour d'Azyr should pay a bitter price for this. "It was your eloquence he feared, Philippe," he said. "Then if I can get no justice for this deed, at least it shall be fruitless to him. The thing he feared in you he shall fear in me. He feared that men might be swayed by your eloquence to the undoing of such things as himself. Men shall be swayed by it still. For your eloquence and your arguments shall be my heritage from you. I will make them my own. It matters nothing that I do not believe in your gospel of freedom. I know it, every word of it, that is all that matters to our purpose, yours and mine. If all else fails, your thoughts shall find expression in my living tongue. Thus at least we shall have frustrated his vile aim to still the voice he feared. It shall profit him nothing to have your blood upon his soul. That voice in you would never half so relentlessly have hounded him and his as it shall in me, if all else fails." It was an exulting thought. It calmed him, It soothed his grief and he began very softly to pray. And then his heart trembled as he considered that Philippe, a man of peace, almost a priest, an apostle of Christianity, had gone to his Maker with the sin of anger on his soul. It was horrible. Yet God would see the righteousness of that anger. And in no case, be man's interpretation of divinity what it might, could that one sin outweigh the loving good that Philippe had ever practiced, the noble purity of his great heart. God, after all, reflected André-Louis, was not a grand seigneur. Chapter 5. The Lord of Gavrillac. For the second time that day André-Louis set out for the chateau, walking briskly, and heeding not at all the curious eyes that followed him through the village, and the whisperings that marked his passage through the people, all agog by now with that day's event in which he had been an actor. He was ushered by Benoit, the elderly body servant, rather grandiloquently called the seneschal, into the ground-floor room known traditionally as the library. It still contained several shelves of neglected volumes from which it derived its title, but implements of the chase, fowling pieces, powder horns, hunting bags, sheath knives, obtruded far more prominently than those of study. The furniture was massive, of oak richly carved, and belonging to another age. Great massive oak beams crossed the rather lofty whitewashed ceiling. Here the squat Seigneur de Gavrillac was restlessly pacing when André-Louis was introduced. He was already informed, as he announced at once, of what had taken place at the Breton Arme. The de Chamberlain had just left him, and he confessed himself deeply grieved and deeply perplexed. "The pity of it," he said. "The pity of it." He bowed his enormous head. So estimable a young man and so full of promise. Ah, this La Tour d'Azur is a hard man, and he feels very strongly in these matters. He may be right. I don't know. I have never killed a man for holding different views from mine. In fact, I have never killed a man at all. It isn't in my nature. I shouldn't sleep of nights if I did. But men are differently made. "The question, monsieur my godfather," said André-Louis, "is what is to be done." He was quite calm and self-possessed, but very white. De Kercadia stared at him blankly out of his pale eyes. "Why, what the devil is there to do? From what I am told, Vilmorin went so far as to strike him, le Marquis, under the very grossest provocation, which he himself provoked by his revolutionary language. The poor lad's head was full of this encyclopedish trash. Comes of too much reading. I have never set much store by books, André, and I have never known anything but trouble to come out of learning. It unsettles a man. It complicates his views of life, destroys the simplicity which makes for peace of mind and happiness. Let this miserable affair be a warning to you, André. You are yourself too prone to these new-fashioned speculations upon a different constitution of the social order. You see what comes of it. A fine, estimable young man, the only prop of his widowed mother too, forgets himself, his position, his duty to that mother, everything, and goes and gets himself killed like this. It is infernally sad. On my soul it is sad." He produced a handkerchief, and blew his nose with vehemence. André-Louis felt a tightening of his heart, a lessening of the hopes, never too sanguine, which he had founded upon his godfather. "Your criticisms," he said, "are all for the conduct of the dead and none for that of the murderer. It does not seem possible that you should be in sympathy with such a crime." "Crime?" shrilled M. de Kercadia. "My God, boy, you are speaking of M. de la Tour d'Azur." "I am, and of the abominable murder he has committed." "Stop." De Kercadia was very emphatic. "I cannot permit that you apply such terms to him. I cannot permit it. Le Marquis is my friend and is likely very soon to stand in a still closer relationship." "Notwithstanding this?" asked André-Louis. De Kercadia was frankly impatient. "Why, what has this to do with it? I may deplore it, but I have no right to condemn it. It is a common way of adjusting differences between gentlemen." "You really believe that? What the devil do you imply, André? Should I say a thing that I don't believe? You begin to make me angry. 'Thou shalt not kill' is the king's law as well as God's. You are determined to quarrel with me, I think." "It was a duel." André-Louis interrupted him. "It is no more a duel than if it had been fought with pistols of which only M. le Marquis was loaded." He invited Philippe to discuss the matter further, with the deliberate intent of forcing a quarrel upon him and killing him. "Be patient with me, monsieur my godfather. I am not telling you of what I imagine but what M. le Marquis himself admitted to me." Dominated a little by the young man's earnestness, M. de Kercadia's pale eyes fell away. He turned with a shrug and sauntered over to the window. It would need a court of honor to decide such an issue. And we have no courts of honor, he said. But we have courts of justice. With returning testiness the seigneur swung round to face him again. And what court of justice do you think would listen to such a plea as you appear to have in mind? There is the court of the king's lieutenant at Rennes. And do you think the king's lieutenant would listen to you? Not to me perhaps, monsieur. But if you were to bring the plaint. I bring the plaint? De Kercadia's pale eyes were wide with horror of the suggestion. The thing happened here on your domain. I bring a plaint against M. de la Tour d'Azyr. You are out of your senses, I think. Oh, you are mad as that poor friend of yours who has come to this end through meddling in what did not concern him. The language he used here to M. Le Marquis on the score of maybe was of the most offensive. Perhaps you didn't know that. It does not at all surprise me that the Marquis should have desired satisfaction. I see, said André-Louis on a note of hopelessness. You see? What the devil do you see? That I shall have to depend upon myself alone. And what the devil do you propose to do, if you please? I shall go to Rennes, and lay the facts before the king's lieutenant. He'll be too busy to see you. And M. de Kercadia's mind swung a trifle inconsequently, as weak minds will. There is trouble enough in Rennes already on the score of these crazy States General, with which the wonderful M. Necker is to repair the finances of the kingdom. As if a peddling Swiss bank clerk, who is also a damned Protestant, could succeed where such men as Calonne and Brienne have failed. Good afternoon, monsieur my godfather, said André-Louis. Where are you going? Was the querulous demand. Home at present. To Rennes in the morning. Wait, boy, wait. The squat little man rolled forward, affectionate concern on his great ugly face, and he set one of his podgy hands on his godson's shoulder. Now listen to me, André, he reasoned. This is sheer knight-errantry, moonshine lunacy. You'll come to no good by it if you persist. You've read Don Quixote, and what happened to him when he went tilting against windmills? It's what will happen to you, neither more nor less. Leave things as they are, my boy. I wouldn't have a mischief happen to you. André-Louis looked at him, smiling wanly. I swore an oath today which it would damn my soul to break. You mean that you'll go in spite of anything that I may say? Impetuous as he was inconsequent, M. de Kercadia was bristling again. Very well then, go. Go to the devil. I will begin with the king's lieutenant. And if you get into the trouble you are seeking, don't come whimpering to me for assistance, the seigneur stormed. He was very angry now. Since you choose to disobey me, you can break your empty head against the windmill and be damned to you. André-Louis bowed with a touch of irony and reached the door. If the windmill should prove too formidable, said he from the threshold, I may see what can be done with the wind. Goodbye, monsieur my godfather. He was gone, and M. de Kercadia was alone, purple in the face, puzzling out that last cryptic utterance, and not at all happy in his mind, either on the score of his godson or of M. de la Tour d'Azyr. He was disposed to be angry with them both. He found these headstrong, willful men who relentlessly followed their own impulses very disturbing and irritating. Himself he loved his ease and to be at peace with his neighbors, and that seemed to him so obviously the supreme good of life that he was disposed to brand them as fools who troubled to seek other things. Chapter 6. The Windmill. There was between Nantes and Rennes an established service of 3 stagecoaches weekly in each direction, which for a sum of 24 livres, roughly the equivalent of an English guinea, would carry you the 70 and odd miles of the journey in some 14 hours. Once a week one of the diligences going in each direction would swerve aside from the high road to call at Gavrillac, to bring and take letters, newspapers, and sometimes passengers. It was usually by this coach that André-Louis came and went when the occasion offered. At present, however, he was too much in haste to lose a day awaiting the passing of that diligence. So it was on a horse hired from the Breton Arme that he set out next morning, and an hour's brisk ride under a grey wintry sky, by a half-ruined road through 10 miles of flat, uninteresting country, brought him to the city of Rennes. He rode across the main bridge over the Vilaine, and so into the upper and principal part of that important city of some 30,000 souls, most of whom, he opined from the seething, clamant crowds that everywhere blocked his way, must on this day have taken to the streets. Clearly Philippe had not overstated the excitement prevailing there. He pushed on as best he could, and so came at last to the Place Royale, where he found the crowd to be most dense. From the plinth of the equestrian statue of Louis XV, a white-faced young man was excitedly addressing the multitude. His youth and dress proclaimed the student, and a group of his fellows, acting as a guard of honor to him, kept the immediate precincts of the statue. Over the heads of the crowd André-Louis caught a few of the phrases flung forth by that eager voice. It was the promise of the king. It is the king's authority they flout. They arrogate to themselves the whole sovereignty in Brittany. The king has dissolved them. These insolent nobles defying their sovereign and the people. Had he not known already, from what Philippe had told him, of the events which had brought the Third Estate to the point of active revolt, those few phrases would fully have informed him. This popular display of temper was most opportune to his need, he thought. And in the hope that it might serve his turn by disposing to reasonableness the mind of the king's lieutenant, he pushed on up the wide and well-paved Rue Royale, where the concourse of people began to diminish. He put up his hired horse at the Come de Surf and set out again on foot to the Palais de Justice. There was a brawling mob by the framework of poles and scaffoldings about the building cathedral, upon which work had been commenced a year ago. But he did not pause to ascertain the particular cause of that gathering. He strode on, and thus came presently to the handsome Italianate palace that was one of the few public edifices that had survived the devastating fire of 60 years ago. He won through with difficulty to the great hall, known as the Salle des Pas Perdus, where he was left to cool his heels for a full half-hour after he had found an usher so condescending as to inform the god who presided over that shrine of justice that a lawyer from Gavrillac humbly begged an audience on an affair of gravity. That the god condescended to see him at all was probably due to the grave complexion of the hour. At long length he was escorted up the broad stone staircase, and ushered into a spacious, meagerly furnished anteroom, to make one of a waiting crowd of clients, mostly men. There he spent another half-hour, and employed the time in considering exactly what he should say. This consideration made him realize the weakness of the case he proposed to set before a man whose views of law and morality were colored by his social rank. At last he was ushered through a narrow but very massive and richly decorated door into a fine well-lighted room furnished with enough gilt and satin to have supplied the boudoir of a lady of fashion. It was a trivial setting for a king's lieutenant, but about the king's lieutenant there was, at least to ordinary eyes, nothing trivial. At the far end of the chamber, to the right of one of the tall windows that looked out over the inner court, before a goat-legged writing table with Watteau panels, heavily encrusted with ormolu, sat that exalted being. Above a scarlet coat with an order flaming on its breast, and a billow of lace in which diamonds sparkled like drops of water, sprouted the massive powdered head of M. de Lesdiguières. It was thrown back to scowl upon this visitor with an expectant arrogance that made André-Louis wonder almost was a genuflection awaited from him. Perceiving a lean, lantern-jawed young man with straight, lank black hair, in a caped riding coat of brown cloth, and yellow buckskin breeches, his knee boots splashed with mud, the scowl upon that august visage deepened until it brought together the thick black eyebrows above the great hooked nose. "You announce yourself as a lawyer of Gavrillac with an important communication," he growled. It was a peremptory command to make this communication without wasting the valuable time of a king's lieutenant, of whose immense importance it conveyed something more than a hint. De Lesdiguières accounted himself an imposing personality, and he had every reason to do so, for in his time he had seen many a poor devil scared out of all his senses by the thunder of his voice. He waited now to see the same thing happen to this youthful lawyer from Gavrillac. But he waited in vain. André-Louis found him ridiculous. He knew pretentiousness for the mask of worthlessness and weakness. And here he beheld pretentiousness incarnate. It was to be read in that arrogant poise of the head, that scowling brow, the inflection of that reverberating voice. Even more difficult than it is for a man to be a hero to his valet, who has witnessed the dispersal of the parts that make up the imposing whole, is it for a man to be a hero to the student of man who has witnessed the same in a different sense. André-Louis stood forward boldly, impudently, thought M. de Lesdiguières. "You are His Majesty's lieutenant here in Brittany," he said, and it almost seemed to the august lord of life and death that this fellow had the incredible effrontery to address him as one man speaking to another. "You are the dispenser of the king's high justice in this province." Surprise spread on that handsome sallow face under the heavily powdered wig. "Is your business concerned with this infernal insubordination of the canaille?" he asked. "It is not, monsieur." The black eyebrows rose. "Then what the devil do you mean by intruding upon me at a time when all my attention is being claimed by the obvious urgency of this disgraceful affair? The affair that brings me is no less disgraceful and no less urgent." "It will have to wait," thundered the great man in a passion, and tossing back a cloud of lace from his hand, he reached for the little silver bell upon his table. "A moment, monsieur." André-Louis' tone was peremptory. De Lesdiguières checked in sheer amazement at its impudence. "I can state it very briefly. Haven't I said already? And when you have heard it," André-Louis went on relentlessly, interrupting the interruption, "you will agree with me as to its character. De Lesdiguières considered him very sternly. "What is your name?" he asked. "André-Louis Moreau." "Well, André-Louis Moreau, if you can state your plea briefly, I will hear you. But I warn you that I shall be very angry if you fail to justify the impertinence of this insistence at so inopportune a moment." "You shall be the judge of that, monsieur," said André-Louis, and he proceeded at once to state his case, beginning with the shooting of Maybe, and passing thence to the killing of M. de Vilmorin. But he withheld until the end the name of the great gentleman against whom he demanded justice, persuaded that did he introduce it earlier he would not be allowed to proceed. He had a gift of oratory of whose full powers he was himself hardly conscious yet, though destined very soon to become so. He told his story well, without exaggeration, yet with a force of simple appeal that was irresistible. Gradually the great man's face relaxed from its forbidding severity. Interest, warming almost to sympathy, came to be reflected on it. "And who, sir, is the man you charge with this?" "The Marquis de la Tour d'Azyr." The effect of that formidable name was immediate. Dismayed anger, and an arrogance more utter than before, took the place of the sympathy he had been betrayed into displaying. "Who?" he shouted, and without waiting for an answer, "Why, here's impudence," he stormed on, "to come before me with such a charge against a gentleman of M. de la Tour d'Azyr's eminence. How dare you speak of him as a coward?" "I speak of him as a murderer," the young man corrected. "And I demand justice against him." "You demand it, do you? My God, what next?" "That is for you to say, monsieur." It surprised the great gentleman into a more or less successful effort of self-control. "Let me warn you," said he acidly, "that it is not wise to make wild accusations against a nobleman. That, in itself, is a punishable offense, as you may learn. Now listen to me. In this matter of Maybe, assuming your statement of it to be exact, the gamekeeper may have exceeded his duty, but by so little that it is hardly worth comment. Consider, however, that in any case it is not a matter for the king's lieutenant, or for any court but the seigneurial court of M. de la Tour d'Azyr himself. It is before the magistrates of his own appointing that such a matter must be laid, since it is matter strictly concerning his own seigneurial jurisdiction. As a lawyer you should not need to be told so much. As a lawyer I am prepared to argue the point. But as a lawyer I also realize that if that case were prosecuted, it could only end in the unjust punishment of a wretched gamekeeper, who did no more than carry out his orders, but who none the less would now be made a scapegoat, if scapegoat were necessary. I am not concerned to hang Benet on the gallows earned by M. de la Tour d'Azyr." De Lesdiguières smote the table violently. "My God!" he cried out, to add more quietly on a note of menace, "you are singularly insolent, my man. That is not my intention, sir, I assure you. I am a lawyer pleading a case, the case of M. de Vilmorin. It is for his assassination that I have come to beg the king's justice." "But you yourself have said that it was a duel," cried the lieutenant, between anger and bewilderment. "I have said that it was made to appear a duel. There is a distinction, as I shall show, if you will condescend to hear me out." "Take your own time, sir," said the ironical M. de Lesdiguières, whose tenure of office had never yet held anything that remotely resembled this experience. André-Louis took him literally. "I thank you, sir," he answered solemnly, and submitted his argument. "It can be shown that M. de Vilmorin never practiced fencing in all his life, and it is notorious that M. de la Tour d'Azyr is an exceptional swordsman. Is it a duel, monsieur, where one of the combatants alone is armed? For it amounts to that on a comparison of their measures of respective skill. There has scarcely been a duel fought on which the same trumpery argument might not be advanced, but not always with equal justice. And in one case at least it was advanced successfully." "Successfully? When was that?" 10 years ago in Dauphiny. I refer to the case of M. de Gesvres, a gentleman of that province, who forced a duel upon M. de la Roche-Jeannin and killed him. De Jeannin was a member of a powerful family, which exerted itself to obtain justice. It put forward just such arguments as now obtain against M. de la Tour d'Azyr. As you will remember, the judges held that the provocation had proceeded of intent from M. de Gesvres. They found him guilty of premeditated murder, and he was hanged. De Lesdiguières exploded yet again. "Death of my life," he cried. "Have you the effrontery to suggest that M. de la Tour d'Azyr should be hanged? Have you? But why not, monsieur, if it is the law, and there is precedent for it as I have shown you, and if it can be established that what I state is the truth, as established it can be without difficulty? Do you ask me why not? Have you temerity to ask me that?" "I have, monsieur. Can you answer me?" If you cannot, monsieur, I shall understand that whilst it is possible for a powerful family like that of La Roche-Jeanine to set the law in motion, the law must remain inert for the obscure and uninfluential, however brutally wronged by a great nobleman. De Lesdiguières perceived that in argument he would accomplish nothing against this impassive, resolute young man. The menace of him grew more fierce. I should advise you to take yourself off at once, and to be thankful for the opportunity to depart unscathed. I am then to understand, monsieur, that there will be no inquiry into this case? That nothing that I can say will move you? You are to understand that if you are still there in 2 minutes it will be very much the worse for you. And De Lesdiguières tinkled the silver handbell upon his table. I have informed you, monsieur, that a duel, so-called, has been fought and a man killed. It seems that I must remind you, the administrator of the king's justice, that duels are against the law, and that it is your duty to hold an inquiry. I come as the legal representative of the bereaved mother of M. de Vilmorin to demand of you the inquiry that is due. The door behind André-Louis opened softly. De Lesdiguières, pale with anger, contained himself with difficulty. You seek to compel us, do you, you impudent rascal? He growled. You think the king's justice is to be driven headlong by the voice of any impudent roturier? I marvel at my own patience with you. But I give you a last warning, master lawyer, keep a closer guard over that insolent tongue of yours, or you will have cause very bitterly to regret its glibness. He waved a jeweled, contemptuous hand, and spoke to the usher standing behind André. To the door, he said shortly. André-Louis hesitated a second. Then with a shrug he turned. This was the windmill indeed, and he a poor knight of rueful countenance. To attack it at closer quarters would mean being dashed to pieces. Yet on the threshold he turned again. De Lesdiguières, said he, may I recite to you an interesting fact in natural history? The tiger is a great lord in the jungle, and was for centuries the terror of lesser beasts, including the wolf. The wolf, himself a hunter, wearied of being hunted. He took to associating with other wolves, and then the wolves, driven to form packs for self-protection, discovered the power of the pack and took to hunting the tiger with disastrous results to him. You should study Buffon, M. de Lesdiguières. I have studied a buffoon this morning, I think, was the punning sneer with which M. de Lesdiguières replied. But that he conceived himself witty, it is probable he would not have condescended to reply at all. I don't understand you, he added. But you will, M. de Lesdiguières. You will, said André-Louis, and so departed. Chapter 7. The Wind. He had broken his feudal lance with the windmill. The image suggested by M. de Kercadia persisted in his mind, and it was, he perceived, by sheer good fortune that he had escaped without hurt. There remained the wind itself, the whirlwind. And the events in Rennes, reflex of the graver events in Nantes, had set that wind blowing in his favor. He set out briskly to retrace his steps towards the Place Royale, where the gathering of the populace was greatest, where, as he judged, lay the heart and brain of this commotion that was exciting the city. But the commotion that he had left there was as nothing to the commotion which he found on his return. Then there had been a comparative hush to listen to the voice of a speaker who denounced the First and Second Estates from the pedestal of the statue of Louis XV. Now the air was vibrant with the voice of the multitude itself, raised in anger. Here and there men were fighting with canes and fists. Everywhere a fierce excitement raged, and the gendarmes sent thither by the king's lieutenant to restore and maintain order were so much helpless flotsam in that tempestuous human ocean. There were cries of "To the Palais! To the Palais! Down with the assassins! Down with the nobles! To the Palais!" An artisan who stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the press enlightened André-Louis on the score of the increased excitement. "They've shot him dead. His body is lying there where it fell at the foot of the statue. And there was another student killed not an hour ago over there by the cathedral works. Party. If they can't prevail in one way they'll prevail in another." The man was fiercely emphatic. "They'll stop at nothing. If they can't overawe us, by God, they'll assassinate us. They are determined to conduct these states of Brittany in their own way. No interests but their own shall be considered." André-Louis left him still talking, and clove himself a way through that human press. At the statue's base he came upon a little cluster of students about the body of the murdered lad, all stricken with fear and helplessness. "You here, Moreau?" said a voice. He looked round to find himself confronted by a slight, swarthy man of little more than 30, firm of mouth and impertinent of nose, who considered him with disapproval. It was Le Chapelier, a lawyer of Rennes, a prominent member of the literary chamber of that city, a forceful man, fertile in revolutionary ideas and of an exceptional gift of eloquence. Ah, it is you, Chapelier. Why don't you speak to them? Why don't you tell them what to do? Up with you, man. And he pointed to the plinth. Le Chapelier's dark, restless eyes searched the other's impassive face for some trace of the irony he suspected. They were as wide asunder as the poles, these two in their political views, and mistrusted as André-Louis was by all his colleagues of the literary chamber of Rennes, he was by none mistrusted so thoroughly as by this vigorous Republican. Indeed, had Le Chapelier been able to prevail against the influence of the seminarist Vilmorin, André-Louis would long since have found himself excluded from that assembly of the intellectual youth of Rennes, which he exasperated by his eternal mockery of their ideals. So now Le Chapelier suspected mockery in that invitation, suspected it even when he failed to find traces of it on André-Louis' face, for he had learnt by experience that it was a face not often to be trusted for an indication of the real thoughts that moved behind it. Your notions and mine on that score can hardly coincide, said he. Can there be two opinions? Quoth André-Louis. There are usually two opinions whenever you and I are together, Moreau, more than ever now that you are the appointed delegate of a nobleman. You see what your friends have done. No doubt you approve their methods. He was coldly hostile. André-Louis looked at him without surprise. So invariably opposed to each other in academic debates, how should Le Chapelier suspect his present intentions? If you won't tell them what is to be done, I will, said he. Nom de Dieu. If you want to invite a bullet from the other side, I shall not hinder you. It may help to square the account. Scarcely were the words out than he repented them, for as if in answer to that challenge André-Louis sprang up onto the plinth. Alarmed now, for he could only suppose it to be André-Louis' intention to speak on behalf of privilege, of which he was a publicly appointed representative, Le Chapelier clutched him by the leg to pull him down again. Ah, that no, he was shouting. Come down, you fool. Do you think we will let you ruin everything by your clowning? Come down. André-Louis, maintaining his position by clutching one of the legs of the bronze horse, flung his voice like a bugle note over the heads of that seething mob. Citizens of Rennes, the motherland is in danger. The effect was electric. A stir ran like a ripple over water, across that froth of upturned human faces, and completest silence followed. In that great silence they looked at this slim young man, hatless, long wisps of his black hair fluttering in the breeze, his neckcloth in disorder, his face white, his eyes on fire. André-Louis felt a sudden surge of exultation as he realized by instinct that at one grip he had seized that crowd, and that he held it fast in the spell of his cry and his audacity. Even Le Chapelier, though still clinging to his ankle, had ceased to tug. The reformer, though unshaken in his assumption of André-Louis' intentions, was for a moment bewildered by the first note of his appeal. And then, slowly, impressively, in a voice that traveled clear to the ends of the square, the young lawyer of Gavrillac began to speak. Shuddering in horror of the vile deed here perpetrated, my voice demands to be heard by you. You have seen murder done under your eyes, the murder of one who nobly, without any thought of self, gave voice to the wrongs by which we are all oppressed. Fearing that voice, shunning the truth as foul things shun the light, our oppressors sent their agents to silence him in death. Le Chapelier released at last his hold of André-Louis' ankle, staring up at him the while in sheer amazement. It seemed that the fellow was in earnest, serious for once, and for once on the right side. What had come to him? Of assassins what shall you look for but assassination? I have a tale to tell which will show that this is no new thing that you have witnessed here today. It will reveal to you the forces with which you have to deal. Yesterday. There was an interruption. A voice in the crowd, some 20 paces perhaps, was raised to shout. Yet another of them. Immediately after the voice came a pistol shot, and a bullet flattened itself against the bronze figure just behind André-Louis. Instantly there was turmoil in the crowd, most intense about the spot whence the shot had been fired. The assailant was one of a considerable group of the opposition, a group that found itself at once beset on every side, and hard put to it to defend him. From the foot of the plinth rang the voice of the students making chorus to Le Chapelier, who was bidding André-Louis to seek shelter. Come down at once. They'll murder you as they murdered La Rivière. Let them. He flung wide his arms in a gesture supremely theatrical and laughed. I stand here at their mercy. Let them, if they will, add mine to the blood that will presently rise up to choke them. Let them assassinate me. It is a trade they understand. But until they do so, they shall not prevent me from speaking to you, from telling you what is to be looked for in them. And again he laughed, not merely in exultation as they supposed who watched him from below, but also in amusement. And his amusement had two sources. One was to discover how glibly he uttered the phrases proper to whip up the emotions of a crowd. The other was in the remembrance of how the crafty Cardinal de Retz, for the purpose of inflaming popular sympathy on his behalf, had been in the habit of hiring fellows to fire upon his carriage. He was in just such case as that arch-politician. True, he had not hired the fellow to fire that pistol shot, but he was none the less obliged to him, and ready to derive the fullest advantage from the act. The group that sought to protect that man was battling on, seeking to hew a way out of that angry, heaving press. "Let them go," André-Louis called down. "What matters one assassin more or less? Let them go and listen to me, my countrymen." And presently, when some measure of order was restored, he began his tale. In simple language now, yet with a vehemence and directness that drove home every point, he tore their hearts with the story of yesterday's happenings at Gavrillac. He drew tears from them with the pathos of his picture of the bereaved widow Maybe and her 3 starving destitute children, orphaned to avenge the death of a pheasant, and the bereaved mother of that M. de Vilmorin, a student of Rennes, known here to many of them, who had met his death in a noble endeavor to champion the cause of an esurient member of their afflicted order. The Marquis de La Tour d'Azyr said of him that he had too dangerous a gift of eloquence. It was to silence his brave voice that he killed him. But he has failed of his object. For I, poor Philippe de Vilmorin's friend, have assumed the mantle of his apostleship, and I speak to you with his voice today. It was a statement that helped Le Chapelier at last to understand, at least in part, this bewildering change in André-Louis, which rendered him faithless to the side that employed him. "I am not here," continued André-Louis, "merely to demand at your hands vengeance upon Philippe de Vilmorin's murderers. I am here to tell you the things he would today have told you had he lived. So far at least he was frank. But he did not add that they were things he did not himself believe, things that he accounted the cant by which an ambitious bourgeoisie, speaking through the mouths of the lawyers who were its articulate part, sought to overthrow to its own advantage the present state of things. He left his audience in the natural belief that the views he expressed were the views he held. And now in a terrible voice, with an eloquence that amazed himself, he denounced the inertia of the royal justice where the great are the offenders. It was with bitter sarcasm that he spoke of their king's lieutenant, M. de Lesdiguières. "Do you wonder," he asked them, "that M. de Lesdiguières should administer the law so that it shall ever be favorable to our great nobles? Would it be just, would it be reasonable that he should otherwise administer it?" He paused dramatically to let his sarcasm sink in. It had the effect of reawakening Le Chapelier's doubts, and checking his dawning conviction in André-Louis' sincerity. Whither was he going now? He was not left long in doubt. Proceeding, André-Louis spoke as he conceived that Philippe de Vilmorin would have spoken. He had so often argued with him, so often attended the discussions of the literary chamber, that he had all the rant of the reformers, that was yet true in substance, at his fingers' ends. Consider, after all, the composition of this France of ours. 1,000,000 of its inhabitants are members of the privileged classes. They compose France. They are France. For surely you cannot suppose the remainder to be anything that matters. It cannot be pretended that 24,000,000 souls are of any account, that they can be representative of this great nation, or that they can exist for any purpose but that of servitude to the million elect. Bitter laughter shook them now, as he desired it should. Seeing their privileges in danger of invasion by these 24 millions, mostly canails, possibly created by God, it is true, but clearly so created to be the slaves of privilege. Does it surprise you that the dispensing of royal justice should be placed in the stout hands of these Lesdiguières, men without brains to think or hearts to be touched? Consider what it is that must be defended against the assault of us others, canaille. Consider a few of these feudal rights that are in danger of being swept away should the privileged yield even to the commands of their sovereign, and admit the third estate to an equal vote with themselves. What would become of the right of terrage on the land, of parciere on the fruit trees, of carpot on the vines? What of the corvées by which they command forced labor, of the ban de vendage, which gives them the first vintage, the banvin which enables them to control to their own advantage the sale of wine? What of their right of grinding the last liard of taxation out of the people to maintain their own opulent estate? The cens, the lods et vents, which absorb a fifth of the value of the land, the blairie, which must be paid before herds can feed on communal lands, the pulverage to indemnify them for the dust raised on their roads by the herds that go to market, the sextilage on everything offered for sale in the public markets, the edalinage and all the rest. What of their rights over men and animals for field labor, of ferries over rivers, and of bridges over streams, of sinking wells, of warren, of dovecot, and of fire, which last yields them a tax on every peasant hearth? What of their exclusive rights of fishing and of hunting, the violation of which is ranked as almost a capital offense. And what of other rights, unspeakable, abominable, over the lives and bodies of their people, rights which, if rarely exercised, have never been rescinded? To this day, if a noble returning from the hunt were to slay 2 of his serfs to bathe and refresh his feet in their blood, he could still claim in his sufficient defense that it was his absolute feudal right to do so. Roughshod, these million privileged ride over the souls and bodies of 24 million contemptible canaille existing but for their own pleasure. Woe betide him who so much as raises his voice in protest in the name of humanity against an excess of these already excessive abuses. I have told you of one remorselessly slain in cold blood for doing no more than that. Your own eyes have witnessed the assassination of another here upon this plinth, of yet another over there by the cathedral works, and the attempt upon my own life. Between them and the justice due to them in such cases stand these Lestiguières, these king's lieutenants, not instruments of justice, but walls erected for the shelter of privilege and abuse whenever it exceeds its grotesquely excessive rights. Do you wonder that they will not yield an inch, that they will resist the election of a third estate with the voting power to sweep all these privileges away, to compel the privileged to submit themselves to a just equality in the eyes of the law with the meanest of the canaille they trample underfoot, to provide that the monies necessary to save this state from the bankruptcy into which they have all but plunged it shall be raised by taxation to be borne by themselves in the same proportion as by others? Sooner than yield to so much they prefer to resist even the royal command. A phrase occurred to him used yesterday by Vilmorin, a phrase to which he had refused to attach importance when uttered then. He used it now. In doing this they are striking at the very foundations of the throne. These fools do not perceive that if that throne falls over, it is they who stand nearest to it who will be crushed. A terrific roar acclaimed that statement. Tense and quivering with the excitement that was flowing through him, and from him out into that great audience, he stood a moment smiling ironically. Then he waved them into silence, and saw by their ready obedience how completely he possessed them. For in the voice with which he spoke each now recognized the voice of himself, giving at last expression to the thoughts that for months and years had been inarticulately stirring in each simple mind. Presently he resumed, speaking more quietly, that ironic smile about the corner of his mouth growing more marked. In taking my leave of M. de Lestiguières I gave him warning out of a page of natural history. I told him that when the wolves, roaming singly through the jungle, were weary of being hunted by the tiger, they banded themselves into packs, and went hunting the tiger in their turn. De Lestiguières contemptuously answered that he did not understand me. But your wits are better than his. You understand me, I think? Don't you? Again a great roar, mingled now with some approving laughter, was his answer. He had wrought them up to a pitch of dangerous passion, and they were ripe for any violence to which he urged them. If he had failed with the windmill, at least he was now master of the wind. To the palais, they shouted, waving their hands, brandishing canes, and, here and there, even a sword. To the palais. Down with M. de Lestiguières. Death to the king's lieutenant. He was master of the wind indeed. His dangerous gift of oratory, a gift nowhere more powerful than in France, since nowhere else are men's emotions so quick to respond to the appeal of eloquence, had given him this mastery. At his bidding now the gale would sweep away the windmill against which he had flung himself in vain. But that, as he straightforwardly revealed it, was no part of his intent. Ah, wait, he bade them. Is this miserable instrument of a corrupt system worth the attention of your noble indignation? He hoped his words would be reported to M. de Lestiguières. He thought it would be good for the soul of M. de Lestiguières to hear the undiluted truth about himself for once. It is the system itself you must attack and overthrow, not a mere instrument, a miserable painted lath such as this. And precipitancy will spoil everything. Above all, my children, no violence. My children. Could his godfather have heard him? You have seen often already the result of premature violence elsewhere in Brittany, and you have heard of it elsewhere in France. Violence on your part will call for violence on theirs. They will welcome the chance to assert their mastery by a firmer grip than heretofore. The military will be sent for. You will be faced by the bayonets of mercenaries. Do not provoke that, I implore you. Do not put it into their power, do not afford them the pretext they would welcome to crush you down into the mud of your own blood. Out of the silence into which they had fallen anew broke now the cry of, "What else then? What else?" "I will tell you," he answered them. "The wealth and strength of Brittany lies in Nantes, a bourgeois city, one of the most prosperous in this realm, rendered so by the energy of the bourgeoisie and the toil of the people. It was in Nantes that this movement had its beginning, and as a result of it the king issued his order dissolving the states as now constituted, an order which those who base their power on privilege and abuse do not hesitate to thwart. Let Nantes be informed of the precise situation, and let nothing be done here until Nantes shall have given us the lead. She has the power, which we in Rennes have not, to make her will prevail as we have seen already. Let her exert that power once more, and until she does so do you keep the peace in Rennes. Thus shall you triumph. Thus shall the outrages that are being perpetrated under your eyes be fully and finally avenged." As abruptly as he had leapt upon the plinth did he now leap down from it. He had finished. He had said all, perhaps more than all, that could have been said by the dead friend with whose voice he spoke. But it was not their will that he should thus extinguish himself. The thunder of their acclamations rose deafeningly upon the air. He had played upon their emotions, each in turn, as a skillful harpist plays upon the strings of his instrument. And they were vibrant with the passions he had aroused, and the high note of hope on which he had brought his symphony to a close. A dozen students caught him as he leapt down, and swung him to their shoulders, where again he came within view of all the acclaiming crowd. The delicate Le Chapelier pressed alongside of him with flushed face and shining eyes. "My lad," he said to him, "you have kindled a fire today that will sweep the face of France in a blaze of liberty." And then to the students he issued a sharp command. "To the literary chamber, at once. We must concert measures upon the instant. A delegate must be dispatched to Nantes forthwith, to convey to our friends there the message of the people of Rennes." The crowd fell back, opening a lane through which the students bore the hero of the hour. Waving his hands to them, he called upon them to disperse to their homes, and await there in patience what must follow very soon. "You have endured for centuries with a fortitude that is a pattern to the world," he flattered them. "Endure a little longer yet. The end, my friends, is well in sight at last." They carried him out of the square and up the Rue Royale to an old house, one of the few old houses surviving in that city that had risen from its ashes, where in an upper chamber lighted by diamond-shaped panes of yellow glass the literary chamber usually held its meetings. Thither in his wake the members of that chamber came hurrying, summoned by the messages that Le Chapelier had issued during their progress. Behind closed doors a flushed and excited group of some 50 men, the majority of whom were young, ardent, and afire with the illusion of liberty, hailed André-Louis as the strayed sheep who had returned to the fold, and smothered him in congratulations and thanks. Then they settled down to deliberate upon immediate measures, whilst the doors below were kept by a guard of honor that had improvised itself from the masses. And very necessary was this. For no sooner had the chamber assembled than the house was assailed by the gendarmerie of M. de Lestiguières, dispatched in haste to arrest the firebrand who was inciting the people of Rennes to sedition. The force consisted of 50 men. 500 would have been too few. The mob broke their carbines, broke some of their heads, and would indeed have torn them into pieces had they not beaten a timely and well-advised retreat before a form of horseplay to which they were not at all accustomed. And whilst that was taking place in the street below, in the room above stairs the eloquent Le Chapelier was addressing his colleagues of the literary chamber. Here, with no bullets to fear and no one to report his words to the authorities, Le Chapelier could permit his oratory a full, unintimidated flow. And that considerable oratory was as direct and brutal as the man himself was delicate and elegant. He praised the vigor and the greatness of the speech they had heard from their colleague Moreau. Above all he praised its wisdom. Moreau's words had come as a surprise to them. Hitherto they had never known him as other than a bitter critic of their projects of reform and regeneration, and quite lately they had heard, not without misgivings, of his appointment as delegate for a nobleman in the states of Brittany. But they held the explanation of his conversion. The murder of their dear colleague Vilmorin had produced this change. In that brutal deed Moreau had beheld at last in true proportions the workings of that evil spirit which they were vowed to exorcise from France. And today he had proven himself the stoutest apostle among them of the new faith. He had pointed out to them the only sane and useful course. The illustration he had borrowed from natural history was most apparent. Above all, let them pack like the wolves, and to ensure this uniformity of action in the people of all Brittany, let a delegate at once be sent to Nantes, which had already proved itself the real seat of Brittany's power. It but remained to appoint that delegate, and Le Chapelier invited them to elect him. André-Louis, on a bench near the window, a prey now to some measure of reaction, listened in bewilderment to that flood of eloquence. As the applause died down he heard a voice exclaiming, "I propose to you that we appoint our leader here, Le Chapelier, to be that delegate." Le Chapelier reared his elegantly dressed head, which had been bowed in thought, and it was seen that his countenance was pale. Nervously he fingered a gold spyglass. "My friends," he said slowly, "I am deeply sensible of the honor that you do me. but in accepting it I should be usurping an honor that rightly belongs elsewhere. Who could represent us better, who more deserving to be our representative, to speak to our friends of Nantes with the voice of Rennes, than the champion who once already today has so incomparably given utterance to the voice of this great city? Confer this honor of being your spokesman where it belongs, upon André-Louis Moreau. Rising in response to the storm of applause that greeted the proposal, André-Louis bowed and forthwith yielded. Be it so, he said simply. It is perhaps fitting that I should carry out what I have begun, though I too am of the opinion that Le Chapelier would have been a worthier representative. I will set out tonight. You will set out at once, my lad, Le Chapelier informed him, and now revealed what an uncharitable mind might account the true source of his generosity. It is not safe after what has happened for you to linger an hour in Rennes, and you must go secretly. Let none of you allow it to be known that he has gone. I would not have you come to harm over this, André-Louis, but you must see the risks you run, and if you are to be spared to help in this work of salvation of our afflicted motherland, you must use caution, move secretly, veil your identity even. Or else M. de Lestiguières will have you laid by the heels, and it will be good night for you. Chapter 8. Omnes Omnibus. André-Louis rode forth from Rennes committed to a deeper adventure than he had dreamed of when he left the sleepy village of Gavrillac. Lying the night at a roadside inn and setting out again early in the morning, he reached Nantes soon after noon of the following day. Through that long and lonely ride through the dull plains of Brittany, now at their dreariest in their winter garb, he had ample leisure in which to review his actions and his position. From one who had taken hitherto a purely academic and by no means friendly interest in the new philosophies of social life, exercising his wits upon these new ideas merely as a fencer exercises his eye and wrist with the foils, without ever suffering himself to be deluded into supposing the issue a real one, he found himself suddenly converted into a revolutionary firebrand, committed to revolutionary action of the most desperate kind. The representative and delegate of a nobleman in the states of Brittany, he found himself simultaneously and incongruously the representative and delegate of the whole third estate of Rennes. It is difficult to determine to what extent, in the heat of passion and swept along by the torrent of his own oratory, he might yesterday have succeeded in deceiving himself. But it is at least certain that, looking back in cold blood now, he had no single delusion on the score of what he had done. Cynically he had presented to his audience one side only of the great question that he propounded. But since the established order of things in France was such as to make a rampart for M. de la Tour d'Azyr, affording him complete immunity for this and any other crimes that it pleased him to commit, why, then the established order must take the consequences of its wrongdoing. Therein he perceived his clear justification. And so it was without misgivings that he came on his errand of sedition into that beautiful city of Nantes, rendered by its spacious streets and splendid port the rival in prosperity of Bordeaux and Marseilles. He found an inn on the Quai La Fosse, where he put up his horse, and where he dined in the embrasure of a window that looked out over the tree-bordered quay and the broad bosom of the Loire, on which argosies of all nations rode at anchor. The sun had again broken through the clouds, and shed its pale wintry light over the yellow waters and the tall-masted shipping. Along the quays there was a stir of life as great as that to be seen on the quays of Paris. Foreign sailors in outlandish garments and of harsh-sounding, outlandish speech, stalwart fishwives with baskets of herrings on their heads, voluminous of petticoat above bare legs and bare feet, calling their wares shrilly and almost inarticulately, watermen in woolen caps and loose trousers rolled to the knees, peasants in goatskin coats, their wooden shoes clattering on the round kidney stones, shipwrights and laborers from the dockyards, bellows menders, rat catchers, water carriers, ink sellers, and other itinerant peddlers. And, sprinkled through this proletariat mass that came and went in constant movement, André-Louis beheld tradesmen in sober garments, merchants in long fur-lined coats, occasionally a merchant prince rolling along in his two-horse cabriolet to the whip-crackings and shouts of "Gare" from his coachman, occasionally a dainty lady carried past in her sedan chair, with perhaps a mincing abbé from the episcopal court tripping along in attendance, occasionally an officer in scarlet riding disdainfully, and once the great carriage of a nobleman, with escutcheon panels and a pair of white-stockinged powdered footmen in gorgeous liveries hanging on behind. And there were Capuchins in brown and Benedictines in black and secular priests in plenty, for God was well served in the 16 parishes of Nantes, and by way of contrast there were lean-jawed, out-at-elbow adventurers, and gendarmes in blue coats and gaitered legs, sauntering guardians of the peace. Representatives of every class that went to make up the 70,000 inhabitants of that wealthy, industrious city were to be seen in the human stream that ebbed and flowed beneath the window from which André-Louis observed it. Of the waiter who ministered to his humble wants with soup and bouillie, and a measure of vin gris, André-Louis inquired into the state of public feeling in the city. The waiter, a staunch supporter of the privileged orders, admitted regretfully that an uneasiness prevailed. Much would depend upon what happened at Rennes. If it was true that the king had dissolved the states of Brittany, then all should be well, and the malcontents would have no pretext for further disturbances. There had been trouble and despair in Nantes already. They wanted no repetition of it. All manner of rumors were abroad, and since early morning there had been crowds besieging the portals of the Chamber of Commerce for definite news. But definite news was yet to come. It was not even known for a fact that His Majesty actually had dissolved the states. It was striking too, the busiest hour of the day upon the Bourse, when André-Louis reached the Place du Commerce. The square, dominated by the imposing classical building of the Exchange, was so crowded that he was compelled almost to fight his way through to the steps of the magnificent Ionic porch. A word would have sufficed to have opened a way for him at once. But guile moved him to keep silent. He would come upon that waiting multitude as a thunderclap, precisely as yesterday he had come upon the mob at Rennes. He would lose nothing of the surprise effect of his entrance. The precincts of that house of commerce were jealously kept by a line of ushers armed with staves, a guard as hurriedly assembled by the merchants as it was evidently necessary. One of these now effectively barred the young lawyer's passage as he attempted to mount the steps. André-Louis announced himself in a whisper. The stave was instantly raised from the horizontal, and he passed and went up the steps in the wake of the usher. At the top, on the threshold of the chamber, he paused and stayed his guide. "I will wait here," he announced. "Bring the president to me." "Your name, monsieur?" Almost had André-Louis answered him when he remembered Le Chapelier's warning of the danger with which his mission was fraught, and Le Chapelier's parting admonition to conceal his identity. "My name is unknown to him. It matters nothing. I am the mouthpiece of a people, no more. Go." The usher went, and in the shadow of that lofty pillared portico André-Louis waited, his eyes straying out ever and anon to survey that spread of upturned faces immediately below him. Soon the president came, others following, crowding out into the portico, jostling one another in their eagerness to hear the news. "You are a messenger from Rennes?" "I am the delegate sent by the literary chamber of that city to inform you here in Nantes of what is taking place." "Your name?" André-Louis paused. "The less we mention names perhaps the better." The president's eyes grew big with gravity. He was a corpulent, florid man, purse-proud and self-sufficient. He hesitated a moment. Then, "Come into the chamber," said he. "By your leave, monsieur, I will deliver my message from here, from these steps." "From here?" The great merchant frowned. "My message is for the people of Nantes, and from here I can speak at once to the greatest number of Nantais of all ranks, and it is my desire, and the desire of those whom I represent, that as great a number as possible should hear my message at first hand. Tell me, sir, is it true that the king has dissolved the states?" André-Louis looked at him. He smiled apologetically and waved a hand towards the crowd, which by now was straining for a glimpse of this slim young man who had brought forth the president and more than half the numbers of the chamber, guessing already, with that curious instinct of crowds, that he was the awaited bearer of tidings. "Summon the gentlemen of your chamber, monsieur," said he, "and you shall hear all." "So be it." A word, and forth they came to crowd upon the steps, but leaving clear the topmost step and a half-moon space in the middle. To the spot so indicated, André-Louis now advanced very deliberately. He took his stand there, dominating the entire assembly. He removed his hat, and launched the opening bombshell of that address which is historic, marking as it does one of the great stages of France's progress towards revolution. "People of this great city of Nantes, I have come to summon you to arms." In the amazed and rather scared silence that followed he surveyed them for a moment before resuming. "I am a delegate of the people of Rennes, charged to announce to you what is taking place, and to invite you in this dreadful hour of our country's peril to rise and march to her defense." "Name?" "Your name," a voice shouted, and instantly the cry was taken up by others, until the multitude rang with the question. He could not answer that excited mob as he had answered the president. It was necessary to compromise, and he did so happily. "My name," said he, "is Omnes Omnibus, all for all. Let that suffice you now. I am a herald, a mouthpiece, a voice, no more. I come to announce to you that since the privileged orders, assembled for the states of Brittany and Rennes, resisted your will, our will, despite the king's plain hint to them, His Majesty has dissolved the states. There was a burst of delirious applause. Men laughed and shouted, and cries of "Vive le Roi" rolled forth like thunder. André-Louis waited, and gradually the preternatural gravity of his countenance came to be observed, and to beget the suspicion that there might be more to follow. Gradually silence was restored, and at last André-Louis was able to proceed. "You rejoiced too soon. Unfortunately, the nobles, in their insolent arrogance, have elected to ignore the royal dissolution, and in despite of it persist in sitting and in conducting matters as seems good to them." A silence of utter dismay greeted that disconcerting epilogue to the announcement that had been so rapturously received. André-Louis continued after a moment's pause. "So that these men who were already rebels against the people, rebels against justice and equity, rebels against humanity itself, are now also rebels against their king. Sooner than yield an inch of the unconscionable privileges by which too long already they have flourished, to the misery of a whole nation, they will make a mock of royal authority, hold up the king himself to contempt. They are determined to prove that there is no real sovereignty in France but the sovereignty of their own parasitic fainéantize." There was a faint splutter of applause, but the majority of the audience remained silent, waiting. This is no new thing. Always has it been the same. No minister in the last 10 years, who, seeing the needs and perils of the state, counseled the measures that we now demand as the only means of arresting our motherland in its ever-quickening progress to the abyss, but found himself as a consequence cast out of office by the influence which privilege brought to bear against him. Twice already has M. Necker been called to the ministry, to be twice dismissed when his insistent counsels of reform threatened the privileges of clergy and nobility. For the third time now has he been called to office, and at last it seems we are to have states general in spite of privilege. But what the privileged orders can no longer prevent, they are determined to stultify. Since it is now a settled thing that these states general are to meet, at least the nobles and the clergy will see to it, unless we take measures to prevent them, by packing the third estate with their own creatures, and denying it all effective representation, that they convert the states general into an instrument of their own will for the perpetuation of the abuses by which they live. To achieve this end they will stop at nothing. They have flouted the authority of the king, and they are silencing by assassination those who raise their voices to condemn them. Yesterday in Rennes 2 young men who addressed the people as I am addressing you were done to death in the streets by assassins at the instigation of the nobility. Their blood cries out for vengeance. Beginning in a sullen mutter, the indignation that moved his hearers swelled up to express itself in a roar of anger. "Citizens of Nantes, the motherland is in peril. Let us march to her defense. Let us proclaim it to the world that we recognize that the measures to liberate the third estate from the slavery in which for centuries it has grown find only obstacles in those orders whose frenetic egotism sees in the tears and suffering of the unfortunate and odious tribute which they would pass on to their generations still unborn. Realizing from the barbarity of the means employed by our enemies to perpetuate our oppression that we have everything to fear from the aristocracy they would set up as a constitutional principle for the governing of France, let us declare ourselves at once enfranchised from it. The establishment of liberty and equality should be the aim of every citizen member of the Third Estate, and to this end we should stand indivisibly united, especially the young and vigorous, especially those who have had the good fortune to be born late enough to be able to gather for themselves the precious fruits of the philosophy of this 18th century." Acclamations broke out unstintedly now. He had caught them in the snare of his oratory, and he pressed his advantage instantly. "Let us all swear," he cried in a great voice, "to raise up in the name of humanity and of liberty a rampart against our enemies, to oppose to their bloodthirsty covetousness the calm perseverance of men whose cause is just. And let us protest here and in advance against any tyrannical decrees that should declare us seditious when we have none but pure and just intentions. Let us make oath upon the honor of our motherland that should any of us be seized by an unjust tribunal, intending against us one of those acts termed of political expediency, which are, in effect, but acts of despotism, let us swear, I say, to give a full expression to the strength that is in us and do that in self-defense which nature, courage, and despair dictate to us." Loud and long rolled the applause that greeted his conclusion, and he observed with satisfaction and even some inward grim amusement that the wealthy merchants who had been congregated upon the steps, and who now came crowding about him to shake him by the hand and to acclaim him, were not merely participants in, but the actual leaders of, this delirium of enthusiasm. It confirmed him, had he needed confirmation, in his conviction that just as the philosophies upon which this new movement was based had their source in thinkers extracted from the bourgeoisie, So the need to adopt those philosophies to the practical purposes of life was most acutely felt at present by those bourgeois who found themselves debarred by privilege from the expansion their wealth permitted them. If it might be said of André-Louis that he had that day lighted the torch of the revolution in Nantes, it might with even greater truth be said that the torch itself was supplied by the opulent bourgeoisie. I need not dwell at any length upon the sequel. It is a matter of history how that oath which Omnes Omnibus administered to the citizens of Nantes formed the backbone of the formal protest which they drew up and signed in their thousands. Nor were the results of that powerful protest, which, after all, might already be said to harmonize with the expressed will of the sovereign himself, long delayed. Who shall say how far it may have strengthened the hand of Necker, when on the 27th of that same month of November he compelled the council to adopt the most significant and comprehensive of all those measures to which clergy and nobility had refused their consent. On that date was published the royal decree ordaining that the deputies to be elected to the States General should number at least 1,000, and that the deputies of the Third Estate should be fully representative by numbering as many as the deputies of clergy and nobility together. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. Dusk of the following day was falling when the homing André-Louis approached Gavrillac. Realizing fully what a hue and cry there would presently be for the apostle of revolution who had summoned the people of Nantes to arms, he desired as far as possible to conceal the fact that he had been in that maritime city. Therefore he made a wide detour, crossing the river at Bruz and recrossing it a little above Chavagne, so as to approach Gavrillac from the north, and create the impression that he was returning from Rennes, whither he was known to have gone 2 days ago. Within a mile or so of the village he caught in the fading light his first glimpse of a figure on horseback pacing slowly towards him. But it was not until they had come within a few yards of each other, and he observed that this cloaked figure was leaning forward to peer at him, that he took much notice of it. And then he found himself challenged almost at once by a woman's voice. "It is you, André, at last." He drew rein, mildly surprised to be assailed by another question, impatiently, anxiously asked. "Where have you been?" "Where have I been, Cousin Aline?" "Seeing the world. I have been patrolling this road since noon today waiting for you." She spoke breathlessly in haste to explain. "A troop of the Maréchaussée from Rennes descended upon Gavrillac this morning in quest of you. They turned the chateau and the village inside out, and at last discovered that you were due to return with a horse hired from the Breton arm. So they have taken up their quarters at the inn to wait for you. I have been here all the afternoon on the lookout to warn you against walking into that trap. My dear Aline, that I should have been the cause of so much concern and trouble. Never mind that. It is not important. On the contrary, it is the most important part of what you tell me. It is the rest that is unimportant. Do you realize that they have come to arrest you?" she asked him with increasing impatience. "You are wanted for sedition, and upon a warrant from M. de Lesdiguières." "Sedition?" quoth he, and his thoughts flew to that business at Nantes. It was impossible they could have had news of it in Rennes and acted upon it in so short a time. "Yes, sedition. The sedition of that wicked speech of yours at Rennes on Wednesday." "Oh, that," said he. "Pooh." His note of relief might have told her, had she been more attentive, that he had to fear the consequences of a greater wickedness committed since. "Why, that was nothing." "Nothing? I almost suspect that the real intentions of these gentlemen of the Maréchaussée have been misunderstood. Most probably they have come to thank me on M. de Lesdiguières' behalf. I restrained the people when they would have burnt the Palais and himself inside it. After you had first incited them to do it. I suppose you were afraid of your work. You drew back at the last moment. But you said things of M. de Lesdiguières, if you are correctly reported, which he will never forgive." "I see," said André-Louis, and he fell into thought. But Emilie de Kercadia had already done what thinking was necessary, and her alert young mind had settled all that was to be done. "You must not go into Gavrillac," she told him, "and you must get down from your horse and let me take it. I will stable it at the chateau tonight. And sometime tomorrow afternoon, by when you should be well away, I will return it to the Breton arm." "Oh, but that is impossible." "Impossible? Why?" "For several reasons. One of them is that you haven't considered what will happen to you if you do such a thing." "To me? Do you suppose I am afraid of that pack of oafs sent by M. Lesdiguières? I have committed no sedition. But it is almost as bad to give aid to one who is wanted for the crime. That is the law. What do I care for the law? Do you imagine that the law will presume to touch me? Of course there is that. You are sheltered by one of the abuses I complained of at Rennes. I was forgetting. Complain of it as much as you please, but meanwhile profit by it. Come, André, do as I tell you. get down from your horse. And then, as he still hesitated, she stretched out and caught him by the arm. Her voice was vibrant with earnestness. André, you don't realize how serious is your position. If these people take you, it is almost certain that you will be hanged. Don't you realize it? You must not go to Gavrillac. You must go away at once and lie completely lost for a time until this blows over. Indeed, until my uncle can bring influence to bear to obtain your pardon, you must keep in hiding. That will be a long time then, said André-Louis. M. de Kercadia has never cultivated friends at court. There is M. de la Tour d'Azur, she reminded him to his astonishment. That man, he cried, and then he laughed. But it was chiefly against him that I aroused the resentment of the people of Rennes. I should have known that all my speech was not reported to you. It was, and that part of it among the rest. And yet you are concerned to save me, the man who seeks the life of your future husband at the hands either of the law or of the people? Or is it, perhaps, that since you have seen his true nature revealed in the murder of poor Philippe, you have changed your views on the subject of becoming Marquise de la Tour d'Azur? You often show yourself without any faculty of deductive reasoning. Perhaps. But hardly to the extent of imagining that M. de la Tour d'Azur will ever lift a finger to do as you suggest. In which, as usual, you are wrong. He will certainly do so if I ask him. If you ask him? Sheer horror rang in his voice. Why, yes. You see, I have not yet said that I will be Marquise de la Tour d'Azur. I am still considering. It is a position that has its advantages. One of them is that it ensures a suitor's complete obedience. So. I see the crooked logic of your mind. You might go so far as to say to him, refuse me this, and I shall refuse to be your marquise. You would go so far as that. At need I might. And do you not see the converse implication? Do you not see that your hands would then be tied, that you would be wanting in honor if afterwards you refused him? And do you think that I would consent to anything that could so tie your hands? Do you think I want to see you damned, Aline? Her hand fell away from his arm. Oh, you are mad, she exclaimed, quite out of patience. Possibly. But I like my madness. There is a thrill in it unknown to such sanity as yours. By your leave, Aline, I think I will ride on to Gavrillac. André, you must not. It is death to you. In her alarm she backed her horse and pulled it across the road to bar his way. It was almost completely night by now, but from behind the rack of clouds overhead a crescent moon sailed out to alleviate the darkness. Come now, she enjoined him. Be reasonable. Do as I bid you. See, there is a carriage coming up behind you. Do not let us be found here together thus. He made up his mind quickly. He was not the man to be actuated by false heroics about dying, and he had no fancy whatever for the gallows of M. de Lestiguieres providing the immediate task that he had set himself might be accomplished. He had made heard, and ringingly, the voice that M. de la Tour d'Azur imagined he had silenced. But he was very far from having done with life. Aline, on one condition only, and that you swear to me you will never seek the aid of M. de la Tour d'Azur on my behalf. Since you insist, and as time presses, I consent. And now ride on with me as far as the lane. There is that carriage coming up.